Okay, folks, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And as required under the Planning Act, a public meeting is being held prior to the committee making a decision on these applications. And to start things off, I'll introduce the committee. I'm Mr. Robertson. We've got Mr. Marsh here. We've got Ms. Richardson, Ms. Archer, and Mr. Strangway. And staff in person here in the council chambers. We've got Ms. Berry, the manager of planning, and Ms. Berry will be presenting for Mr. Stainton today, who I believe is ill. We wish him the very best. And we've got our recording secretary, Charlotte Crockford. And I'm via electronic participation. I believe we've got Councillor Yeo on. Yes, we do. And we've got Mr. Lahi, our secretary-treasurer, Mr. Harding, planner 2, and Suzanne Murchison, our chief building official. And welcome, everyone. All right, committee. Are there any comments or questions with respect to the agenda? If not, then I'll get a motion to adopt it as printed. Ms. Archer, Ms. Richardson, comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? All right, being none, the minutes of the previous month's meeting. Any comments or questions with respect to those minutes? Do I have a mover? Okay, Mr. Strangway, seconded by Mr. Marsh. No further comments or questions. All those in favor? And that carries. All right. All right, for the benefit of everyone, the committee will hear comments, gather information, and may ask questions to clarify statements made. The committee may ask and answer questions or redirect questions to the appropriate person. Excuse me. Please note that any information or comments given to the committee during this meeting, they're considered evidence. We will first hear from staff, then the applicant or his or her agent. We will then hear from any person in support of or from those who have questions, concerns, or are opposed to the application. And finally, the applicant or his or her agent will have an opportunity to respond to any of the statements made to the committee. If you do wish to speak, I will be asking the applicant to speak, and then I will be asking if there's anyone that wishes to speak in support of the application or in opposition to the application. If you wish to speak, when you come on the screen, please state your name. And then at these meetings, we will afford you 10 minutes to speak. No one ever comes close to that, but we do afford you the 10 minutes. And if you find that you must have more time to complete your presentation, then I will ask the committee if they wish to permit that. But it is entirely up to the committee as to an extension of time for the minutes. All right. Having said all that, we're moving right along, and we're now dealing with file number D20-2021-077, and this is vacant lands, Logie Street, former town of Lindsay. And Ms. Berry, go ahead, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members, I will be summarizing the staff report that Mr. Stainton had prepared and submitted as part of the agenda for today's meeting. The first minor variance application is brought to us by land use planning consultant Michael Bissett of Bellsfields on behalf of the owners, Skyline Real Estate Holdings Incorporated. The minor variance, if approved, would facilitate the construction of an apartment building, 6 stories in height, and the purpose of the application is to request relief with respect to 3 zoning provisions. Now, this would be on what is currently a vacant parcel of land as indicated on the map before you, and it is on Logie Street in the town of Lindsay. So the effect of the 3 zoning provisions to which relief is being sought: 1, to reduce the minimum number of parking spaces from 228 down to 218, a reduction of 10 spaces. Secondly, to allow for spaces to be located within the front yard of the property, and that would be 22 of the total parking spaces to be located in the front yard. And lastly, the third area of relief that is being sought is to reduce the minimum amount of landscaped open space. And the zoning bylaw looks to characterizing landscaping open space through percentages. 40% is the minimum, and 34.2% is what's being requested. Okay, so I'll just provide a little bit of context here and then take us through the evaluation of the 4 tests of the minor variance. So the proposal, again, 6-story apartment building that would be differentiating it from a condominium, so for tenants, and 2,686.5 square meter footprint for a total of 168 dwelling units in that apartment building. The official plan for the town of Lindsay designates the land residential. The zone category is residential high-rise 1. Servicing will be full municipal water and sanitary and storm sewer. And we have a mix of adjacent land uses. So surrounding land uses include low-rise residential, as well as natural heritage features, the Victoria Rail Trail, agricultural land to the east, of course, the Scugog River to the west. All right, so with respect to the first test of minor variance, is the proposal desirable and appropriate for the use of land? Fundamental, Mr. Chair, to this application is the fact that it is a proposal to provide much needed rental housing as a housing option that the town is substantially deficient in. So notwithstanding the decreased parking, the L-shaped design of the building does increase the landscape buffer widths between the rear of the residences. Location in the city certainly encourages active transportation along the Scugog River corridor at this location. And with respect to the decrease, I do just want to note at least 1 parking space has been provided for to accommodate the number of units in the proposed apartment building. So with respect to the location of the parking specifically, we do see a shift of the majority of the parking spaces to the eastern sections of the site, away from the back of the residences, specifically along Primo Crescent. Now, neither the zoning bylaw nor the design standards for the city require that there be other parking considerations other than surface parking, and I would refer to things like underground parking or an above-ground parkade as examples. So neither of those are requirements, and I bring that to your attention. With respect to the reduction, just under 6% of landscaped open space, emphasis here is on quality over quantity. This is also a feature that gets heavily reviewed through the associated site plan application process, and that is an application process that the applicant and owners are working through with city staff at the moment. So also compensated by the natural heritage features surrounding the site that I noted at the outset. With respect to the zoning bylaw, recognizing that the high-rise residential 1 zone already permits the use of this apartment structure size, meaning the 6-story height, this application is not contemplating anything beyond the height requirements or limits and maximums in the zoning bylaw. With respect to the front yard parking, we don't anticipate incompatibilities with use of the site with respect to the parking being located in the front yard. So considering the building maintains the minimum front yard setback within this zoning category, that is deemed to be acceptable. Again, the majority of the parking spaces have been designed to be located outside of the front yard. With respect to landscaping, an adequate level of landscaping for amenity, servicing, and importantly, stormwater infiltration has been provided for on the design as presented. The close proximity to open space amenities like Logie Park and the Victoria Rail Trail do also offer a way to offset the reduction in landscaping. With respect to the official plan, as noted at the outset, designated residential. Higher density residential development is certainly contemplated and supported in the official plan. The technical specific design features and characteristics, the official plan points to the zoning bylaw to identify those, and we have just covered those off in the previous test. All right, so moving on to consultations. Of course, the application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. The statutory requirements for notice were met. In doing so, at the time the report was written, we had not yet received any comments from the public. However, certainly I want to notify the committee that we have no less than 7 submissions we have received at this point. A number of members of the public are attending the meeting today, and I understand will, of course, have an opportunity to make their submissions. We did not receive any concerns or objections from any of our commenting partners. And so, Mr. Chair, that summarizes the report. I will note at the outset of the report, as you could see, there is a recommendation that the minor variance be granted. There are a couple of conditions to that effect. One, of course, that the construction be substantially in accordance with the appendices that are included. And since I note the appendices at this point, if I may ask, thank you, Charlotte, already on the screen, looking at the elevations as included in the appendices, and of course, that is site plan agreement. That is a requirement, and that site plan agreement be registered within 24 months. Now, I just would like to pause there and make a note that, of course, the public hearing is to a large extent the public's first opportunity to really understand and hear about the nature of the proposal, to hear the details of the minor variances, and to ask questions. There could be new information that is presented both to staff and to this committee, which we will hear and then provide feedback on to determine whether the recommendation as printed is appropriate at this point in time, Mr. Chair. I shall leave it there. I do understand that the consultant on behalf of the owner also has comments to further explain the nature of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Well said. Are there any questions of the planner? Mrs. Richards?
Through you, in the written application in the report, it's not stating the type of housing, but you've indicated that it's for seniors.
Mr. Chair, through you, I understand that through some of the material, even to be presented today, that there is an indication that the demographic is one of the targets, yes, and perhaps the target for the housing that's proposed. But I will defer to the consultant to explain that further.
So I question, how many seniors residents do we need? Because we've had several come through this committee within the last year, and there's another one being built on Logie Street, which may or may not be seniors, and we're encouraging seniors to buy homes, and now we're building apartments or condos for them.
Yeah, in all fairness to Ms. Berry, I'm not sure she would have an answer for that, but go ahead.
No, that's fair, thanks, Mr. Chair. And just to sort of maybe elaborate on an earlier comment noted in the description of the application through the report, an application such as this is providing an option. And the housing option, as you can see, there are no conditions that set out who may occupy the units. This is entirely open to the market. Again, the consultant can touch on this, but it is important to note that through the housing studies that the city has conducted recently, in fact, in the last couple of years, there still is an indication that we have a substantial shortage in both rental, but also units targeting the demographic as suggested through this application.
I understood that if it's a city-owned facility, we cannot earmark something for just seniors or whatever, but in the private sector, we can. Is that not correct?
Mr. Chair, through you, that the only way to use your language, to earmark. Any kind of unit is through the Ministry of Health for a licensed care facility. Short of that, whether it's a municipal-owned, a public property, or a private development, it is counter to the provisions in the Planning Act to zone for a specific group. That is not permitted.
I have one more. In some of the comments received from the public, I believe a couple of them mentioned that when they purchased their homes in the area, they were notified that it would be a 4-story facility. So why is it now going to 6?
Mr. Chair, the zoning category on this property permits actually a variety of stories. In that sense, the zoning, regardless of any sort of materials that might have depicted a particular site design at a particular time, certainly can change. And I understand that these things fluctuate in response to market demands, and that the market certainly drives and dictates what options might be something the developer wants to put forward. No doubt the developer's consultant has some additional comments on that.
Anything further from committee? Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through to Ms. Berry, I'm wondering, now that we're looking at all both the reduction in parking spaces and in the front, at any time during the discussions and development of this property, was it suggested that they include underground parking?
Mr. Chair, my apologies. I'd actually defer to the consultant, only to the extent of whether that conversation was held with Mr. Staton. I'm not aware that that conversation has taken place.
Thank you.
Anything further from committee? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? And your name, sir?
Good afternoon. Do you hear me? My name is Mike Bissett. I'm a planner with Bousfields, and I am the agent to Skyline Real Estate Holdings, so I am representing them today. So I'd just like to do a short presentation. Thank you very much. So this is just a cover page. So we are proposing a new rental apartment building on behalf of Skyline. And the next slide, please. I'll just go through the location. So this is located within, it's called Block 39, which is part of the Country Club subdivision. I'm sure many of you are aware of. I actually worked on both the Country Club subdivision as well as the subdivision to the north, which is Primo Court. It's called the Duke subdivision. This block has been shown as a high density block within the subdivision. That subdivision indicated up to 199 units and since about 1999. And then, so this proposal here is to bring that sort of into reality. And now we've proposed this new rental housing apartment building with new options, as noted by Ms. Berry. There is transit available in this location as a loop around at Logie and Primo Court, just to the north. So the lands are now, as you can see on the screen, vacant. So the Victoria Trail is located to the east, Deacon Crescent to the south, and Logie Street and Logie Park to the west, and the recently constructed low-rise subdivision and Primo Court to the north. West of the rail trail, east of the rail trail, also will be future development of residential and parks and commercial uses, all associated with the minister's zoning order east of the trail. So the next slide is an aerial photo, more zoomed in. Site is about 1.6 hectares in size. As I said, is vacant. You can see on there, there's existing access to Victoria Trail from Deacon. And you can see it's kind of an older aerial, but you can see the homes to the north on Primo Court with the rear yards facing the subject site. In the next slide, this is just some photographs. So top left is the north of the site. So this will be the rear yards of the detached homes, primarily bungalows along Primo Court. And you can see there's a fence line there now. That would be improved with a new solid wood fence, new trees and landscaping along that interface, as well as the buffer, which I'll speak to you about. On the top right is to the west is Logie Street and the Logie Street Park, which has sort of just now been revitalized and into a new, with new recreation facilities, et cetera. So accommodating new residential in the area is something that I think that park would be a great amenity for. To the bottom left, it's Deacon Street. So this is Deacon Street with the homes, which is just to the south, with the homes on the south side being sort of semi-detached townhomes facing onto Deacon, again, sort of a low-rise context. And then to the east is Victoria Rail Trail. This is a photo on the bottom right, just indicating the rail trail access, and the rail trail would be to the east. And so the next slide, the proposal, as is noted, is 6-story rental building, 168 rental units, height, use, massing, all permitted by zoning. The variances relate to a minor reduction in parking, a minor parking in the front yard, which I'll speak to more in detail, and minor landscape reduction. So, you know, this building has been designed to incorporate a range of materials, colors, architectural treatments to provide for sort of an attractive and high quality apartment building. And I have an image later just to indicate sort of an example of an actual building constructed by Skyline, just to give you a feel for what it'll look like. The next slide, this is the landscape plans. This indicates the variances. The first variance is a reduction from 228 to 218 spaces, a slight reduction of 10 spaces. And the variance 2 is the 22 parking spaces. I've shown an arrow to kind of the location of those spaces in front of the building. So those are actually located off to the side of the front proper of the main wall facing Logie. So they're, you know, while there's a variance required, they're meeting the intent to not be sort of between the building and the street per se, sort of off to the side where the access comes in. Variance 3 is reducing the landscape open space from 40% to 34.2%. So there was a balance here when considering the development, whether to, you know, in terms of the reduction in parking, as well as the amount of landscaping, as well as, you know, what was brought up earlier, contemplating whether there was a below grade parking, et cetera. And that was a consideration in a context of a below grade parking. Ultimately, you'd end up with likely more units, probably up to the 190 something units. So the decision was made to sort of keep it more of a form that was more a bit lesser in the number of units, and then sort of incorporating a balance between the parking and landscaping on site, with the approach to really having a good perimeter of landscaping along the edges, including a decent buffer, significant buffer along the north, because of the rear yards of Primo Court. To the south is obviously this Deacon Street and then the houses, so there's some more room there. So that was something that was considered, and on balance, this was determined to be the most appropriate approach. The next slide, in terms of just beginning to address some of the concerns we had reviewed, and I know I'd read some letters and been speaking to Mr. Gallagher, who is representing some of the landowners on Primo Court. So just in terms of the builder and the operator, the builder is RHC Reed Heritage, and the operator is Skyline. So Skyline is a well-respected, high-quality rental operator throughout the country. They will continue to own and operate. So it's not a condominium. It's not a flip of a developer. This is a rental operator who will develop this and then continue to own it and operate it and be part of the community. And this is on the bottom right. You can see an image there. It's a bit skewed for some reason in your slides. Maybe it's just my screen, but that's a 6-story building in Guelph, Grange Hill. And you can kind of get the feel for the quality of design and in the building that's going to be coming here, that's proposed anyway. And in terms of the units themselves, there was a lot of discussion in terms of what I'd seen and what type of units, what size of units. Yes, they will be geared to seniors. However, there's not proposed to be any low-income housing here in terms of, in terms of the definition of low-income housing. In terms of seniors, when I say geared to seniors, I don't mean a licensed seniors facility or assisted living, anything of that nature. It's just that would be the geared to market for the rental. Again, it's not condo, it would be rental units geared to seniors. However, there would be a mix of 2 and 1 bedroom units. So there would also be units that would accommodate young professionals in the community as well. And whether that be young families or individuals looking for units within the city. As I said, this area is starting to evolve with increased amenities such as Logie Park and new development coming through the ongoing municipal comprehensive review, et cetera. I know South Lindsay will be evolving quite a bit. So the units will be larger. There'll be 98 2 beds, up to 1,100 square feet in size. The 1 bed's obviously smaller, somewhere around 600 square feet. So I think that was one of the questions that people had, was what kind of target market was it, and were there going to be larger units? And I would say, yeah, the majority will be larger units, and the target market will be seniors, but it would also provide for some young professionals as well, and that would be the target. And then the next slide. This is, there was some concerns certainly from Primo Court, people who live on Primo Court, both about interface in terms of just generally noise and setback and overlook, and also shadow. So I wanted to sort of show the shadow study, and I did provide this to Mr. Gallagher. I'm sure he's had a chance to look at it. So that, typically you look at the shadows and their impacts between, March through June through September. This is a September shadow study. So it sort of indicates sort of at a shoulder season. Obviously in June, it would be even less and there wouldn't be any impact. So this, if you can see here, that shadow is that dark gray. And then the homes along Primo Court, that's their rear yard with that black property line indicating. So you can see the shadow generally falls within the property where the proposal is and not within the rear yards of Primo Court by and large. Now that'll fluctuate through the year, but I think September is a good benchmark, because in June, obviously it's less, more people are outside using in September. In March, it's a little different, but a little less yard activity in late March, like right now, it starts to happen. But it's very much similar. And so I thought that was a good benchmark given the time we have here. So I think that's been addressed. And the next slide, in terms of compatibility with the north, so this is, again, some things have skewed a little bit, but so there's about, 55 feet, about over 16 meters between the building and the rear yards of the Primo Court homes. So, with new tree plantings, shrubbery, new solid wood fence along the north property line, all of those combined with that distance would be, in my view, sufficient to mitigate overlook, noise, things of that nature on the homes, which are the bungalows to the north.
If I may,
And
sir,
so,
you're approaching your time limit.
Am I over? I'm just done.
Are
Perfect
you,
timing.
do
Okay,
you-
so that, I hope that helps approach that, and then it'd be, we're accepting of the conditions of staff as well. I just wanted to note that. as
Did you have much further to say?
well. No, I was just at the end about to say that I was just going to say my recommend approval of the variances, but subject to the conditions recommended by staff.
All right, thank you very much for that. Mr. Marsh, your question to the deputy?
I have a few, thank you. Was there ever public input requested? Did you have any public meetings?
Well, this is a committee of adjustment application. Typically, there's a site plan application, which is not a public process. The committee of adjustment application, there is a notice circulated, and this application followed the process as is set out. But there had been no separate public meeting or anything. It's very much more difficult to do that these days, obviously. No, so there's no separate public meeting. But in terms of this site being slated for a high density block, there was obviously several public meetings in relation to the subdivision and all those rezonings that occurred in the past. But for this specific application, it was just the typical process. So this, notwithstanding that I've had a discussion with Mr. Gallagher, I think that this is our first opportunity to present this additional information to the neighbors.
Right. Secondly, I have a few questions here. So according to a report that was sent by Mr. Gallagher, they did request a 1-month deferral, and you weren't, was there a reason for why you didn't want to defer and discuss it with the people?
Yeah, the Skyline is very interested in moving ahead with this rental proposal, and it's difficult for them to consider delays in that process, and their position instructions were to proceed, and we believe strongly that it's an appropriate form of development, and that was the decision, yes.
Okay. A couple other questions, please, Mr. Chair. So I realize, and it's a little bit of a spin, it's chicken and egg, these things, because you're asking for a variance for parking spaces, but you're actually asking for a variance for more units, correct? That's, if you don't have the parking, you're asking for more units because you can't provide.
No, yeah, sure. No, I understand the question. I mean, it's a matter of, this building as it's presented requires a parking variance. Obviously, more units could be permitted if the parking were provided, which could be in another fashion.
Okay, so
As I say, it could be more than 168 units.
So I'd like to
is
be
the case.
clear, though. In your proposal, in your presentation, you're saying a 6-story rental building is a permitted use, but it's only permitted if you can provide the parking. So
Correct.
It's
that's
not.
Correct.
As
I mean,
is, it wouldn't be.
you require the
Okay.
variances.
All right, I just wanted to.
But it's a permit. The intention there is to make sure that the public is clear that we're not asking for a new use or a new. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I guess that's in the eye of the beholder, but I think there's a bit of a spin on units versus parking. It doesn't seem to have that impact. Can you tell me on this drawing where you want to propose the front yard parking, what the space is between the back of the two? I don't know if you can take me to that.
Okay, I can't see what you're looking at. I'm assuming it's the one where I show the front yard parking in the red.
It's where you're requesting the variance for the 22 parking spaces.
That one. Yeah.
So
I see it now.
what's the space between the rear and the front? Like, as far as backing in, what's the space? You can't tell here.
The rear of
From the
the
rear
space?
of each side.
drive
what's the
aisle
space?
width.
Yeah, the space in between. For the
Yeah,
car.
the drive aisle width between the spaces.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the standard width. I believe it's likely 8 meters or so. But it'll be a standard width.
Okay. The other question I have is regarding you addressed the concerns of the neighbors. You haven't had a meeting with the neighbors, so I don't know how you can address it, but, so Skyline, do they currently own any condominium projects?
Oh, yes. They own condominium projects throughout the country, like
So-
as I noted,
All right, so this property though, once it's
and rental.
once it will, but there's nothing to stop them from
Oh,
applying.
sorry, I misheard your question. Condominium. Yeah, I can't speak to whether they have condominiums. I know Skyline is a rental operator. I can't speak to whether they have condominiums.
But there's no guarantee that someone couldn't buy this property and apply for condominium.
No, I suppose that's true. One could do that, but that's not what's proposed, but that is possible, yes.
We've experienced it, this committee has experienced this very thing where someone wanted it for rental and lo and behold, it ended up being condominium. So I just wanted to be clear that the potential is there for it. And regarding your units geared towards seniors, there is no, and you've addressed that, you've said you can't discriminate against.
Yeah, you can't zone for it. No.
Right. So
It's
again,
geared toward, the question was that I read in one of the remarks was who is it marketed toward? So, yeah, that was the intention.
you'd prefer.
And just being clear about that, yeah.
Okay, that's all for now, and then I'll likely have questions after the next presenter.
Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering, I believe I saw in some of the communication, there's a suggestion that some of the individuals had spoken to you and that there was some room for negotiation to make some changes to the plans. And I thought, oh, that's positive. And then as Mr. Marsh has identified, that you're not in favor of a deferral, that you want to go ahead with this. Has there been communication between you and the residents or representative of the residents? And has there been a discussion about any alterations to the plans?
Yeah, I did have a discussion with Mr. Gallagher, whom I've known for many years, and I respect him, and I did speak about the request for deferral, and I spoke to my client about that. They're aware of that. I did speak to him about, potentially adding landscaping on the north edge, if that would be something that the neighbors would like to see. And I think that I could say today, if that were a condition that we're asked for to provide for additional landscaping along the north edge, my client wouldn't object to that. So that's kind of the discussion as far as it got as it pertains to that. But yeah, but we're still looking to proceed today, yeah.
Thank you. Follow up, if I may. The other thing I want to ask about is the underground parking. You spoke to that. You indicated that if you added underground parking, it would add to the number of units. I'm not sure I clearly understand that. And has there been discussion about further discussion with Mr. Gallagher about adding underground units to avoid so much outside parking?
No, I don't think we had discussion about that. I'm just responding to, I think there was a question about it, and I know that it could be something that happens. Obviously, it changes the cost of providing for it. I can't guarantee that it would occur, but it could occur. And if it were to occur, then if you're going to go underground, likely you're going to provide enough sufficient parking to even increase the units. That would be the most likely outcome.
Okay,
because the
thank you.
maximum is 125 units per hectare. This is about 107 or so under the bylaw.
Thank you.
Anything further? Ms. Archer, go ahead.
Through you, please. All the 22 parking spaces in the front, are they all for visitors?
Yes, they are.
Anything further from committee? All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Bissett. I would now ask, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? I see. And your name,
Mr. Chair, I
sir?
would like to speak in opposition.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, please.
Ye-
My name is Brian Gallagher, Mr. Chair. I'm a planning consultant, retired, but I'm a friend of one of the residents on Primo Court, and he's asked me to advise the residents on Primo that back onto this site. My presentation is fairly long, and so we split it up into 3 parts. And in order for it to make more sense, I would respectfully request that I be allowed to speak now, and then Mr. Finn speak. He has the second part, and then Mr. Van Ginkel, and then you have 2 other people, Mr. and Mrs. Remark, are also wishing to speak to you.
Now, just before you go on, I asked if there was anyone wishing to speak in support of this. So are you suggesting that all of these names you mentioned are part of the application, are applicants?
Yes, they are, and they're all against the application.
They're all against the
May I
application?
proceed? Yes, they're all against the application for variances.
All right, well, let's deal with you first, then. I'll afford you your 10 minutes. Now, you indicated that there was 3 people wish to speak, so are you going to include those 3 people within that 10-minute frame?
No, we'd like to have each one of them have the 10 minutes. They're all independent speakers. They have their own comments as well as part of our overall presentation.
Well, a second, committee, are we okay with that? There's three different,
I think the intent is that Mr. Gallagher is representing the applicant and the others are in opposition.
but we'll deal with the opposition.
Right, after. That's what I think.
Absolutely,
I don't think
yeah.
Mr. Gallagher's clear on that.
All right, Mr. Gallagher, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just to be perfectly clear, I am also in opposition to the application. I think all of your speakers today are in opposition except for Mr. Bissett. I'm just the first speaker in opposition.
Yes, all right. We'll deal with everyone individually then. So you go ahead with your presentation and then we'll deal individually with the others.
Thank you very much, sir. I'd just like to, first of all, talk about this issue of a deferral, which Mr. Bissett talked about. The residents on Primo have only become aware of this proposal through the Committee of Adjustment Notice, as site plan approval, which the applicant has been involved with in the city, is not a public process, and the residents were not aware of it. The zoning bylaw governing this site was approved in the year 2000. That's 22 years ago, long before there were any residents on Primo Court. There's been no engagement with the community by the applicant or by the city. Now, as Mr. Bissett said, I did reach out to him. He's working for Bousfields, who are the agent for this developer. And Mr. Bissett has been very helpful and communicative, which I appreciate. I did ask him if his client would agree to 1 month deferral to permit discussion and possible resolution of the issues. But his client, Skyline Real Estate Holdings Inc., refused to agree to a 1 month deferral. Despite the owner's refusal, we respectfully asked the committee to grant the 1 month deferral to allow for consultation and a proper discussion for the issues. But we are prepared to proceed today, and with your permission, I will go ahead with our remarks. You have before you the City of Kawartha Lakes Planning Report. That report recommends approval of variances as they meet the 4 tests that are laid out by the Planning Act. The report all but ignores the impacts of the proposed building on the neighbors in the community. This report references the removal of parking from part of the lot abutting the Primo residences as the only impact, in that the proposal reduces this impact. It assumes that the residents would rather have the 6-story building close to the Primo property than parking, but no consultation on this issue or any other issue has taken place. There's no mention of the visual, overlook, privacy, noise, and streetscape impacts that are greatly exacerbated by the scale of development that would be permitted if the variances are granted. In addition, the numbers cited in the report are seriously misleading, as explained below. Now, this is a case of the tail wagging the dog, and one of your committee members who spoke earlier has properly identified this. Instead of conforming to the intentions of the zoning bylaw and the official plan, which would result in a reasonable building of 4 stories and approximately 115 units, the developer has decided that he wants 168 units, which requires twisting some of the elements of the zoning bylaw to permit this overdevelopment. Although the variances are all related to providing space for more parking than otherwise permitted, this parking will enable the 168 units, resulting in a 6-story building, exacerbating many negative impacts on the neighborhood and the future residents themselves. The parking variances are the direct cause of the serious negative impacts of this proposed development. Now, the Planning Act lays out 4 tests, as I'm sure the committee members know, that have to be met before the variances can be approved. I will speak about the first one, and the others will speak about the other 3. First one is, do the variances maintain the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Members of the committee will know that many elements of the zoning bylaw work together to create a reasonable development on the lot that will fit with the existing context and be a desirable place to live and an asset to the community. Height, density, setback, and footprint maximums, parking and landscaping minimums. There's no intention that maximums must be achieved, but minimums are important. By varying one or more of these criteria, the balance is upset and the general intent and purpose of the bylaw is not maintained. It appears that the developer has decided that he requires 168 units in his development. Even with a 6-story building, which is the maximum permitted by the bylaw, there's not enough room on the lot to provide the number of parking spaces that would be required, which is 228. So rather than decreasing the number of units to allow adequate room for parking and landscaping, the developer has decided to sacrifice visitor parking, a proper streetscape, and landscaping to support his desire for 168 units. He has asked for a variance to reduce the parking requirement by 10 units. These will be taken from visitor parking. Although, as the city planner notes, the reduction is 4.39% in total parking requirement, it's a 29% reduction in the visitor parking requirement. In other words, 42 down to 30 units, 30 spaces. Well, where will the visitors park when more than 30 come by to be with their friends and family to enjoy the beautiful park across the street? Maybe in the park's parking lot, maybe on Logie, maybe on the neighboring streets. This will create a major negative impact, perhaps even a safety issue for the neighbors and the community. It's neither appropriate or minor and not in keeping with the intention of the zoning bylaw, which aims to contain parking on the development lot. However, even with the elimination of 10 spots, the parking supply for 160 units still falls well short of the requirement in the zoning bylaw. So the owner has then requested that he be permitted to move 22 spots, which the zoning bylaw says should be located to the rear or the side of the building, to a location in front of the building. This contravenes a basic urban design and streetscape principle. It creates a cluttered negative visual impact on the streetscape to be seen by the residents, park users, and all those driving down Logie every time they pass for the life of the building. This is not a minor impact or appropriate, and certainly not the intention of the bylaw, which is designed to provide a beautiful, uncluttered, desirable public realm for all. And then finally, as there still would be insufficient room on the lot for the required resident parking, the owner has asked the committee to allow a reduction in the amount of landscaped open space by 913 square meters, which is just under 10,000 square feet, so that that land can be converted to parking. This is a 14.5% reduction, not 5.8% as reported by the city planner, in the amount of landscaped open space to be provided. There are parks nearby, but on-site landscaping is used for more than recreation that can be had in parks. It softens and moderates the impact of the building. It can provide outdoor amenity space, barbecue area, picnic area, etc., which are not suitable for parks. The landscaping left in the current plan is little more than required buffer strips in a front yard. The amount of landscaping required by the zoning bylaw, which is 40% of the lot, is the same regardless of the density of the development, in order to provide a pleasant environment and permit outdoor activities that are best done on site. This variance proposes to significantly decrease the amount of landscaping by converting it to parking, while at the same time significantly increasing the number of units and therefore residents which would otherwise be permitted. It's a double whammy which could not have been the intention of the zoning bylaw. Granting these variances would provide the parking required to permit 168 units, which is approximately 50 more than the zoning bylaw contemplates, resulting in a 6-story building rather than a 4-story building. Shadow, noise, and overlooked privacy impacts on the neighbors, especially on Primo, will be severe, along with the other significant negative impacts on future residents and neighbors mentioned above. This zoning was put in place long before Primo was designed. Prospective buyers could expect a maximum 4-story building if they had checked the zoning. Now we have a proposal for a 6-story slab. The fact that variances are required is telling the applicant and the city that this is overdevelopment and will not be an asset to the community. These variances will create significant negative impact on the community. They're not minor, they're not appropriate for the development of the lot, and they're not in keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaw. Now, the city planner has advised that the variances maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan, because the official plan permits high-density residential development in the form of apartment buildings. However, the official plan has a lot more to say about how such development should be designed in order to be appropriate for the development of the land. The proposed 6-story slab apartment completely ignores these development criteria. Now, Mr. Chair, that's my part of the presentation. Mr. Finn will continue with it, but perhaps there are some questions, or maybe you'd like to hold the questions till the end of the presentation.
No, as indicated, we'll deal with each one separately. So are there any questions of the deputy? Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gallagher. One quick question. You had indicated at the beginning that you were looking for a 1-month deferral. What do you hope to achieve, feel can be achieved, if a deferral was granted?
Well, what we had hoped for was that we could get a better understanding of the unit and or of the proposal and what was driving it, and that perhaps we could work with the developer to rearrange the bulk of the building or recite the bulk of the building, rearrange the parking so that it would not have such a severe impact, especially on Primo. But of course, we also think about the residents on Deacon to the south. There's lots of ways these buildings could be rearranged and rebuilt that would somewhat lessen the impacts. But, you know, upon reflection of it, I've really come to the conclusion that it is overdevelopment. And so we would also be suggesting that the developer scale back his intentions a bit to be more in keeping with the zoning bylaw and the OP. But, you know, it always hurts. It never hurts to discuss, at least so that people understand where they're coming from and perhaps they can find some way through.
Thank you.
Anything further from committee to the deputy? All right, Mr. Gallagher, thank you very much for your presentation. Oh, I believe I have a question here. Hold on, Mr. Marshall.
Actually, I just want to make clarification. If we listen to the other presenters and we want to go back to Mr. Gallagher after the, okay.
All right, thank you again, Mr. Gallagher. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? In opposition to this application? And your name, sir?
Yes, my name is Eric Finn. As Mr. Gallagher has indicated, I'll be handling part of the presentation that he's put together as a planner.
Go ahead, sir.
Just a couple of introductory remarks, though. I am a resident on Primo Crescent, and it's Primo Crescent, by the way. It's not a court. Primo Crescent has about 25 homes on it, a mix of the 2-story and single-story buildings, all completely detached, all well cared for, and it's a very quiet community. And as you've already heard, we're to the north of this proposed development, and you've heard a fair bit about the impact on our community here, primarily because of the being adjacent directly to the homes which back onto the property. And I unfortunately am one of those owners, being at 43 Primo, which is right at the corner of Logie and Primo Crescent. You've heard about the shade problems, the noise problems, the overview problems. All of these will apply to myself and my neighbors on Primo Crescent. So that's by way of introduction. You've also heard that there has not been an opportunity for much consultation on this matter at all, so that the owners first became aware of the application when they got the notice of application. And I immediately tried to put together a submission, which you probably have in front of you. All I had at the time was the notice and the planning report. And so I put together my notes as best I could. Fortunately, after that, we had word from Mr. Gallagher, and Mr. Gallagher has expanded substantially on anything I had to say in my submission. And I would defer to him on most of the points that I've made in my submission. Let me say, when I first received the notice of application, I was surprised, this being vacant land, that there is not some onus on the owner to present a plan which complies with the zoning bylaw. And then, having looked into it in greater detail, I can see that the owner has taken advantage of all those aspects of the zoning bylaw which benefit the development. But at the same time, because of these variances that are now being placed before this committee, they are trying to vary those portions of the zoning bylaw which benefit the public. The parking spaces and the landscaping. And as I point out in my submission, by trying to break it down into several variances, in effect, they're saying reduce the parking. One would expect that the landscaping would be improved, but instead they still ask for reduction of the landscaping. Now, Mr. Gallagher has gone through mathematical calculations of how this affects the building, and I think he's well within his remarks to say that this building should be considerably smaller in footprint and reduced in number of stories. As Mr. Gallagher indicated, we had divided up his comments so that I would be asked to comment on the effect of the variances with regard to the official plan. And you'll note in my submission, I hadn't referred to the official plan because, as I say, I didn't have any information with regard to the official plan at that point in time. But I can now say that the town of Lindsay's official plan has been in effect since 2000. It requires high density developments to be in conformity with medium density developments. And some of the criteria can be listed. The density, height, character of the development is to be in keeping with adjacent uses. And as you've heard, the adjacent uses on Primo Crescent are completely different. The height and massing of the building at the edge of the residential development shall have regard to the height and massing of the buildings in any adjacent low-density residential areas. Thirdly, on-site recreational facilities or amenities such as playground equipment may be required to service the development. I've seen in the site plans nothing with regard to that. Fourthly, the development shall be designed and landscaped, and buffering shall be provided to ensure that the visual impact of the development on adjacent uses is minimized. And as you've heard, there's overlooking on the properties on Primo Crescent by way of balconies, windows, and it's 6 stories worth of balconies and windows. So the height and scale of this proposed building is a product of excess parking permitted by the requested variances. And the variances will result in a development which clearly does not conform to the intent and purpose of the Lindsay official plan. There is a secondary plan which came into effect in 2017. Doesn't affect matters to any great extent as far as I can see. High density residential lots may accommodate medium rise and high rise apartments where the issues of casting of shadows, obstruction of views, and privacy for adjacent lots need to be managed and potential negative impacts are minimized. Generally, high density residential buildings should be between 5 and 8 story density, and building heights are intended to decrease as the distance of the building from the activity nodes increases. High density residential uses will generally be located close to or within existing and future activity nodes, along arterial roads, along existing or planned transit corridors, or on brownfield sites, where the intensity of residential development supports commerce and transit ridership and generates pedestrian traffic to enliven neighborhood streets. High density residential will be encouraged to have a covered entrance, which is aligned with the street and main building entrance. And we have none of that in this situation. Buildings should incorporate a built form architectural articulation, exterior materials, and window design, which prevent large continuous slab walls. Again, this building is nothing but slab wall. So just continuing, the secondary plan also requires the development criteria for medium density sites to apply to high density developments. And the main criteria in there is that parking areas should be located to minimize their negative visual impact on adjacent low density residential uses, such as in the side or rear yard, interior of site, and or underground or structured parking. And this speaks directly to the variance permitting parking in the front yard, which directly contravenes it. And again, the 6-story apartment with 60 balconies, a minimum setback from adjacent properties is just not in compliance or consistent with the reason for the secondary plan. So Having said that, in my submissions, written submission, I start off by saying it's not in conformity with section 45(1) of the Planning Act. And that would relate to both the minor or lack of minor nature in this application. And the fact that the general purpose, and it's not consistent with the general purpose and intent of the bylaw or the official plan and secondary plan. So that would complete my comments, subject to any questions which the committee may have.
All right, and thank you for that, sir. Are there any questions of the deputy? All right, before I go on to another, Ms. Berry, I apologize to you. There's been some comments made with respect to planning issues, and I realize that Mr. Stainton was in fact the planner and the investigator on this, but do you have any response to anything that's been said so far?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one point of clarification, please, to Mr. Finn, the last speaker. Some extensive references to the secondary plan for Lindsay. I'd like to ensure that the committee and our viewing audience are aware that that plan doesn't exist. The secondary plan is under appeal at the Ontario Land Tribunal. I will leave my comment there for now. Thank you.
And thank you for that. All right. All right, is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this application? In opposition to this application? And your name, sir?
Hello, Mr. Chair. It's Jeff Van Ginkel. I'm, I guess, picking up with the remainder of the presentation from Mr. Brian Gallagher. And I've also submitted my own personal comments, which I'd like to pick up with after the end of the presentation.
All right, go ahead, sir.
All right. So the next portion of the presentation asks, are the variances appropriate for the development of the land? The variances, if granted, will result in a 6-story building with 168 units, deficient parking, and landscaped open area adjacent to low-rise development in a part of town distant from activity nodes. It will create significant negative impacts on the neighbors, community, and the future residents of the site. The style development is not appropriate for the development of this lot. Are the variances minor? The question of whether or not the variances are minor is not conditioned by percentages or numbers. The question is one of impact on the neighbors, community, and future residents. The variances are intended to permit a 168-unit, 6-story apartment building. The impacts will be significant, not minor, in loss of privacy, noise, visual impacts, shadowing, insufficient room for outdoor activities on site, overflow parking, clogging adjacent areas, deficient streetscape, and undesirable urban design. Some alternatives. The owner has several reasonable alternatives to achieve the proposed development without granting of these variances. Underground parking, which has been mentioned, or a parkade. The lack of space on the lot to achieve the parking requirement for 168 units would be eliminated by placing all or a portion of the parking underground. Another option is rezoning. The owner may apply to City of Kawartha Lakes Council for a zone change to permit the use, or that use. In essence, he would be asking council to approve the variances. This would be a better way to proceed, as zone changes involve extensive public consultation and a full review of the impacts of the proposal. Should the owner not wish to take advantage of these avenues for development of a 6-story, 168-unit apartment development, he could consider developing the property in a form that the zoning bylaw and the official plan intended for this property, without the need for any variances. This would involve reducing the project by about 50 units, which would result in a corresponding reduction of height to 4 stories. So that is, I guess, the end to Mr. Brian Gallagher's presentation, which was shared between the last 3 speakers. I myself have presented comments which may echo the majority of the presentation, but I'd just like to go through it anyways and just give you a perspective from a homeowner on Primo Crescent. So I'm a new resident to the City of Kawartha Lakes and an owner of my first single detached home at 37 Primo Crescent, Lindsay. By not purchasing my home directly from the developer, I was informed through discussions with my neighbors as well as a review of the developer's brochure for, I thought the second phase was called the Country Club of Lindsay, but now that I've heard Mr. Bissett speak, it had a different name. But anyways, the intent on the brochure was a 4-story retirement community. With the recent notice of public hearing for minor variances for the vacant lands on Logie Street, I've come to understand that the proposed application is now for a 6-story building. This news is very worrisome for me and my family. With our home backing onto the vacant lands, we will be negatively impacted by the proposed 6-story building, losing privacy and southern exposure for a significant portion of the year. The scale of the building and placement of the building envelope does not aesthetically suit the community while significantly impacting the residents on Primo Crescent. The requirements of the zoning bylaw allow for approximately 110 to 120 units on this site. The purpose of the supposed minor variances is to allow the developer to build additional units by reducing the landscape area requirements to meet the parking requirements for the proposed building density of 168 units. The result of eliminating a portion of the landscape area to meet the parking requirements and support the 168 units results in an additional 2 stories to the proposed building elevation. The additional 2 stories and placement of the parking and building envelope will have a significant negative impact on the properties of Primo Crescent and the streetscape of Logie Street, as well as the neighboring community to the south. My family and I have great concerns regarding the proposed development and do not support the supposed minor variances of the site plan. Considering the developer Skyline Living has been established for some time, I would hope that there is a desire to have a positive impact on the community they choose to develop by working with the established community to find a resolve that satisfies all parties affected. And that is the end of my presentation or my comments.
All right, and thank you for that, sir. Are there any questions of the deputant? All right, and again, thank you, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? In opposition to this application? And your name, sir? We can't hear you, sir. Could you hit a button there and...
I'm trying to unmute. There we go.
There we got you. Okay, your name, sir?
Emil Remark. I'm also a resident on Primo.
Go ahead, sir.
We bought the, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. We bought the house as a new build. And so we waited about a year before we had the occupancy of the house. We dealt with Bromont Homes, who, when we did purchase the house, we were also advised that the property would probably be some sort of a seniors complex or a retirement home. They were looking to either lease the land or sell the land. That's all we knew about the property at the time. We're over by the corner where it's a bit of a wooded area. I think probably some of my concerns have been spoken about, but one would be the environmental issue of the building. I know that behind Primo, between our fence and the proposed building, there's a swale there that's, I don't know whether the city had to put some drainage in there or whatever, but you know, it's an important drain area in there, and I don't know what impact runoff would be from parking or even that building would have on the swale, and which also drains into creek areas. And there's creek areas right behind that building along the tree line where the Trans-Canada Trail is. So I'm just, a little bit worried about the environmental impact. The environmental impact also on the reduction of the green space, the drainage, the aesthetics, and the parking. I already know that there's not enough parking over at the park that was built. A beautiful park, we love it. But when it's busy, cars are all parked along Logie. And I just wonder if there's gonna be some spill off from from a proposed apartment. I'm in the rental business as well, and I know that there's three things in rental: parking, pets, and kids. Those are the three issues that you deal with all the time. Parking has always been a big issue. Parking on the street, parking in no parking zones, parking in fire zones. And, this proposal with the parking, you have to know that today, most families have 2 cars. And in some cases, if there's a drivable teenager in the house, they could have 3 vehicles. And so there's a potential for a lot of vehicles, and whether there's going to be enough parking or not, I don't know. Both Brian and Eric touched on some of the issues that I was concerned about. And I think one thing that shocked my wife and I was the fact that we got this notice in the mail. It was the first we've heard of it. I mean, we knew that the potential was there, but it was a bit of a shock. And then trying to work through this and see what's being developed. I'm really not impressed with the building itself, although some of the pictures did show a little better than the building with a flat roof. It doesn't seem to have the aesthetics that some of the newer buildings have, but it looks like they might sort of have coordinated brick color. But to me, it looks like a building from the 70s when we were building 3-story walk-ups and 5-story with elevators. I do agree with the need for rental. I'm involved in seniors housing in Whitby, and it's one big thing that we're short of is housing for seniors. And I do like the idea that the units are small and they do seem to gear more towards seniors. But also as a homeowner, there's the other things with, destroying the view, whether that building could be flipped. It just seems so close to us on Primo when they've got all of that space where they could potentially flip that building or look at other alternatives on the building, or even reducing the height. So that's about where I'm at. Anything else I would have to say would be saying what Brian and Eric have said, and so I am kind of opposed to these variances and would like to have more consultation on what is going to be built on that property.
All right, thank you for that, sir. Are there any questions of the deputy? Being none, thank you for your presentation. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this application? In opposition to this application? And you're... Oh, can't hear you, ma'am.
Unmute, there we go. I'm Wynne Remark, Emil's wife, and I really don't have anything to add now. I think everything's been covered. So, but yes, I was concerned about the aesthetics and the effect that it would have on the people on Primo Crescent. It just seems to back almost right into our backyards. And again, as my husband said, the aesthetics, the picture that we got made it look like a pretty old 70s style building with a flat roof, and it just didn't look very nice. So I'm against it. As far as 6 stories, I think a 4-story building would make much more sense.
All right, and thank you for that.
And
Are there any questions of the deputy? All right, being none. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? All right, now, Mr. Marsh, you wish to go back to Mr. Gallagher?
No, I'm gonna make a motion.
I'm not ready for that yet. Yes, Ms. Archer?
Through you, please, I would like to ask a question, I think probably to Ms. Murchison. Is she on?
Yep. Chief Building Official, Ms. Murchison, are you online? Yes, we have a question for you.
I just see it on the report, it says spatial separation could be a potential issue. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, so through the chair, we always put that comment in on applications where, based on the small amount of information on a site plan, we can't make a determination whether or not we'll have to address it at building code stage, but it is a building code issue, and we're just really flagging it at this stage. So what'll happen is at the time of the building permit application, we'll do a calculation, or the designer will do a calculation, we'll review those calculations to ensure the construction of the structure is such that it's code compliant for the proximity to a property line.
Thank you for that, Ms. Murchison. All right. Mr. Bissett, if you're on still online, do you have any response to the comments that were made?
Sure, I just would like to respond to a few things. In terms of, there were some comments made about aesthetics. Obviously, we're in site plan, and notwithstanding that there may be various different opinions on aesthetics, that wouldn't be sort of relevant in terms of the variances proposed. In terms of the comments about, you know, the location of the property in relation to the official plan policies, in relation to activity nodes, et cetera. As I noted, this area is evolving, and notwithstanding that it's been a location planned for an apartment building for some time, there is the Logie Street Park was just recently updated, and there'll be new development coming to the area. And there is, as I said, transit available. In terms of the most important things, I think that some comments were still obviously being raised about overlook and privacy. I think Primo Crescent, apologies for saying court, but the overlook and in shadow, I know that was still raised. I'm hoping that what I had showed today did indicate that that significant separation does mitigate the shadow impact. And there was a comment made about, you know, we're meeting the minimum buffer. In fact, the buffer requirement is 3 meters. We're providing about 50 feet on the north edge, because I think we knew that there was obviously that interface. And so the intention was to provide a good buffer on that north side, and to look at the shadow impacts, and staff had specifically looked for those shadow studies. And so just in relation to the variances themselves, notwithstanding there's a parking variance that ultimately does allow for the building as proposed. You know, the intention of the parking rate variance is to provide, it's not meant to control height and massing. It's meant to provide parking for the use. And it has been, in the development engineering, had no objection to the slight reduction. And notwithstanding they're related, it's not as if it were meant to be a control over the height and density. The height permission here is 18 meters, but I understand the comment made by one of the members of the committee, and obviously they're expecting something lower that would meet the rate, or something of this height that would also meet the rate. But we're looking for something of a as of right height that would have a lower rate, because, you know, times have changed, and the rates are starting to come down, and development engineering had no objection to the rate. So from that standpoint, I just wanted to respond on that as well. But I think I know we've taken a lot of your time today, so I don't want to take any more of it. I just wanted to make those additional remarks. Thank you.
And thank you. And no, we're here to hear as thoroughly as we can all of these applications and any situations that pertain to. So timing is not a factor. We want to hear everything. All right. I guess I have an inclination as to where this may be going, Ms. Berry. So I'm just wondering, are we, and I'm not suggesting for a minute this might be the case, but if there was a motion to defer, are we offending any legislation with respect to that as it relates to this application?
Mr. Chair, you wouldn't be offending any legislative permissions or requirements in the Act by electing to move a deferral. The committee does have 3 options, that being one of them. Of course, approval or refusal are the other 2.
And Mr. Bissett, are you still online? Yeah,
I am.
all right. I'm perhaps premature, but I believe that we may be looking at a deferral. How does that, where are you, I realize you've said already that the company you represent are not in favor of that, but does that offer any total hardships for you at this point in time?
I would say this, my instructions as of now are to proceed, but it's the committee's decision whether they prefer to defer it or approve it or refuse it. So I would say that's the best answer I can give you at this time. I'm in your hands.
Thank you. All right, that being the case, Mr. Marsh?
Mr. Chair, I move that this application be deferred to come back no later than the May meeting of this committee. So it gives you actually more than 30 days in case there's any issues.
Yeah. Yes, before I get a seconder, let's have a little discussion. Second it?
No, well, I will, but I was going to ask the mover if he would accept, in addition to that, that the applicant conduct a meeting with the residents. We've encouraged that in the past, that they meet with the residents, and so often we have found that issues are resolved when the application comes back.
That's fine, I'd accept that as a friend.
Yeah. Wondering, Ms. Berry, if should we include the planning in that as well, or would they automatically be part of that? Or because I think that it sounds to me like there are some issues that perhaps the need to. In fact, it looks like perhaps it might even benefit the developer if, in fact, such a public meeting occurred. So, where are you with respect to planning being part of that motion?
Mr. Chair, I think encouraging consultation certainly is a very valuable word of advice and piece of advice from the member. Attaching a condition to require consultation in the form of a meeting, I would offer to you, may not be an appropriate condition, but I think that the consultant is taking sort of great efforts here to listen and not just respond here, but to also consider further engagement with the owner in terms of responding and providing more comprehensive comments back to the public. So if there is an opportunity for them to consult further, whether that's through virtual means by exchange of email or through the consultant who's here on behalf of the public, Mr. Gallagher, or through the city staff facilitating a virtual room for such a meeting to take place. I think all the options are on the table, and I think that the suggestion is a good one. I would encourage you to accept it to remain a very sound suggestion only.
All right, and thank you for that. So, Mr. Marsh, I guess before I ask for a seconder, then your motion to defer would include the public, the applicant, and our planning staff?
As was suggested, that they be encouraged. I don't know if we can actually make it mandatory that they have a public meeting. We can't make it part of the motion that they must. Right, so, right. No, that's what I'm saying. So that the motion would be that we encourage them to, and that it come back to committee no later than the May meeting.
Yeah, now I got a motion on the floor, so the only real discussion has to do with the time frame. That's why I waited. We've got a motion on the floor then, so, we said no later than the May meeting, correct? All right. So is everyone clear on that then? All right. All in favor? And that carries, all right. Councillor Yo, I'll have to make sure I keep checking with you up there. So I saw your hand though, so thank you. All right, so Mr. Bissett, is he still there? There's a motion
I'm
by
here.
the
Thank you.
committee to defer the matter until no later than the May meeting, and we've asked that we encourage the applicant, the members of the public, and our planning staff to get together and see what may result. All right? And thank you very much
Understood.
for your presentation today. Oh, Ms. Archer?
Thank you. Bye now.
I just wanted to make a comment, and I'm not sure if I've figured this out right, but I did a bit of calculating throughout this, and it looks like there's 6 floors, so there'd be 28 units per floor. I think if the owner just had done a 5-story unit, we wouldn't even have to be here. There'd be lots of parking, there'd be lots of everything. So I think the adjacent property owners should kind of think on that, because they could go the 5-story route and we wouldn't have any input at all.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Brissett. All right, we're moving along.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along then. We're dealing with D20-2022-010, and this is 285 Omega Road, and it's the geographic township of Bexley. And again, Ms. Berry. Go ahead, Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have an application for variance submitted by Mr. Tom DeBoer of TD Consulting on behalf of the owners, Mr. Lundrigan and Ms. Bergwis. The application for variance is to acknowledge the existing garage. There has been an increase in height from the maximum for the detached garage, which is 5 meters in the zoning bylaw. However, the garage is built to 6.5 meters. I again will summarize the report for the benefit of the committee, although I trust you have had an opportunity to review it. And I understand that Mr. DeBoer is attending the meeting should the committee have any questions for him. We are looking at the residential lot at 285 Omega Road in Bexley Township. And turning to the official plan designation, the lot is designated waterfront and rural in the city's official plan. It is zoned rural general in the township of Bexley. The lot is just over 2 acres and is privately serviced, private individual well and septic system. All right, so in evaluating the appropriateness of the increased height on this lot for the 115.2 square meter detached garage with some storage space on the upper level, the loft space. The property is bordered by Omega Road to the east, Otter Road to the south, and what is a private, unmaintained road identified as Rockwood Trail to the west. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for bringing up the site plan. I'll emphasize that access is provided via Omega, which is a municipal road. A little bit of site context. Shoreline residences within the neighborhood do vary in age and built form. Now, this subject lot in particular is quite a bit larger than the other shoreline residential lots that surround it. The lot itself is surrounded on all sides by quite substantial vegetative buffers. They, in the opinion of the planner on the file, effectively screen the property from all 3 roads, as well as from the neighboring lots. And because of the extent of landscaping, we don't anticipate any adverse impacts as a result of the 1.5 meter increased height on the garage. Presence of vegetation, again, completely conceals the garage when viewed from Omega and Otter Roads. In the opinion of the planner, the aesthetic of the garage has been chosen to meld quite well with the existing single detached home on the property. So keeping it not just in line aesthetically, but also is visually less prominent because of its massing and the height of the single-family home. This is reiterated through the review of the zoning test. Of course, one of the intentions in the bylaw to restrict height is to ensure that accessory buildings do remain ancillary and subordinate, not just in use, but also in their physical presence on the property. The garage certainly does not exceed the height of the single detached home and has the effect of complementing rather than dominating the other structure being the primary home. All right, all other zone provisions are in compliance on the property, and that takes us to the official plan evaluation. So we, within the waterfront designation, the plan contemplates and permits low-density residential uses, which is how this lot and its use is characterized. With respect to the shoreline setback, 30 meters is maintained, and there are no other issues with respect to the official plan. Of course, the application was circulated in accordance with the statutory planning acts. We did not receive any objections from the agencies or any of our commenting partners. At the time of writing of the report, we hadn't received any comments from the public. However, since the report was submitted to have the package finalized, we did get a letter of objection from a surrounding property owner who I understand is on the line to make a submission to the committee. So pending any new information that we learn at the meeting today, the recommendation for the variance for increased height by 1.5 meters is recommended to be approved with a condition that the building construction proceed in accordance with what we have in Appendices C and D of the report. All right, Mr. Chair, I shall wrap it there.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Are there any questions of the planner? Ms. Richardson, go ahead.
Through you, was this garage constructed without a building permit?
Ms. Chair, I'll assume you'll let me take an answer at that there. I'll just plod on ahead without being invited to speak. To the member, there's an outstanding building permit on this property. It was brought to our attention that was the case, and so we are acknowledging the presence of the garage at this point.
Mr. Strangway. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have a follow-up, Ms. Richardson? Go ahead.
From reading the report, I understood that the outstanding building permit was for the dwelling and not for the garage. So I'm wondering, was this garage built without a building permit and it's brought forward as a result of a complaint?
It would appear, Mr. Chair, through some of the correspondence from one of the property owners that there is a complaint, yes, and we shall hear more details about that complaint. I will also perhaps ask the chair if we could turn to our chief building official for any additional comments on the status of the permit, please.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Ms. Murchison, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. Through the chair, the garage permit, there was a garage permit. The garage permit was issued. Garage was constructed and permit finalized. It was then brought to our attention that the garage was taller than permitted in the zoning bylaw. And that's when the investigation commenced to work with the property owner to correct that deficiency. The outstanding permit that you reference in the report is indeed for the dwelling.
Anything further, Ms. Richardson? Follow-up?
Thank you for that. The one objection we did receive indicated that his application had been refused in 2020, and I'm just wondering if our memories could be refreshed on that and why we refused that particular application. I do know that we have to deal with them individually, but I'd like to have my memory refreshed.
Did you have something to say on that, Mr. Strangway?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Ms. Richardson has posed a very interesting question. Excuse me. The property right next door to it, while I have been here, applied for a garage, and the height was an issue, and there was a balcony and various things. And if my memory serves me correct, the issue we had, the concern we had with it, was it looked like there was going to be living quarters above, and it's one of the few applications we actually turned down. So we have a situation here where right next door, the same type of application, to the best of my knowledge, was turned down, and we're looking at being asked to approve the one next door.
Ms. Murchison, do you have any further comments? You've heard what Mr. Strangway said.
Through the chair, I'm not sure in what respect further comments are being asked.
Well, he's indicated, I'm asking you because the chief building official, Mr. Strangway has indicated that previous application that was extremely similar to this one was turned down because I believe that there was some concern about living accommodation. And now we're looking to support this that reflects similar circumstances. So do you have any? And I'll go to the Ms. Barry as well, but I'm curious to see if you have anything as a building inspector. Anything.
Yeah, through the chair, I would have to defer to the manager of planning, because that's really planning rationale that you're asking about and not building permit.
Just wanted to give you the opportunity. So, Ms. Do you recall what Mr. Strangway is referring to?
I don't, and forgive me for not being involved with the committee at that time. I don't. However, hearing the comments and the members' reflections, and in particular the reference that we've heard about the living quarters, I just want to ensure that we are likening apples to apples in this case and not conflating two issues. It's quite clear that the application before the committee is not one that is contemplating or asking for permission to have habitable space in the accessory in the accessory structure. And it sounds like that was quite a key or pivotal difference between this and the other. Now, again, I really would like us to the extent we can, touch on the issues, which I invite the member of public who has raised the issues to actually articulate them, and if there's an opportunity for us to respond to those or to clarify or to answer, we certainly, will do our best to do that here at this meeting, keeping in mind, of course, that, and I agree with the member, every application is evaluated, reviewed, and decided on its own merits, with the policies at play, as well as the site-specific circumstances of the property subject to that application.
Thank you. I appreciate that because that's correct. This committee does not reflect precedent-setting situations. And again, every application has to be looked at upon its own merits. So, absolutely. All right. Is there anything? Yes, Councillor Yoga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I can't blow my picture up in the Appendix D, but my question is, when the building permit was issued for this garage, was the height in compliance and then was built too high, or was the height just not caught at that time?
All right. Well, let's ask the chief building official that. You heard Councillor Yo's comments, Ms. Murchison. Do you wish to respond?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, it appears in investigating this file that it was not caught through the plans review. However, to further that, the structure was not built in compliance with the approved drawings either. So there's been a variation to the design during the build that further increased another portion of the building to a greater height.
All right, thank you. Follow up, Councillor Yo.
Yeah, the first half of the answer was satisfactory, and then the chief building official threw in another wrench in there. And the problem I have with this and setting precedents and stuff is we got to be careful that we're not, this was built not to conform beyond the permit stage. So when you got the permit, it conformed, and then lo and behold, they built it and it didn't conform. But it sounds like the height, when they got the permit, did conform. And so I guess the question is, the change in the building, did it exacerbate the total height or just the height of another part of it?
Ms. Murchison, go ahead.
Through the chair, I believe, yeah, I believe it actually added very marginally to the overall height of the original design.
Okay, leave it at that. Just because in fact it was missed and it wasn't built on the snide, sort of say that. Okay, thank you for that.
All right. Anything further from committee? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the application? Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, members. Go ahead, or sorry. Good afternoon, members committee. It's Tom DeBoer with TD Consulting. I just want to add a few points of sort of clarification more than anything else. As the chief building officer has alluded to, this was done through a building permit. Sometimes during the process of construction, there are changes. It's my understanding, and unfortunately, I was not part of the construction process. I came in after the fact. What I've been told is the owner of the property wanted to have a larger overhead door on one of the bays of this garage, and during the construction process requested that of the contractor. And I think it was honestly an oversight of many people, because this particular structure was reviewed and accepted by the City of Kawartha Lakes during the construction process. As Suzanne has alluded to, there was a final as part of the permit process provided. The outstanding building permit issue on the property, which is relative to the dwelling itself, not the accessory structure that we're speaking of today. It was due to some landscape features, change in grades, change of elevation of the structure because of some groundwater issues. I have engaged the owner as well as a qualified surveyor to complete the required foundation control certificate and as constructed survey. So that is being contemplated and completed as we speak, which will correct that deficient building permit issue relating to the structure of the house. However, the garage itself was completed through the permit process. It's my understanding that the inspector at the time was aware of the change, but nobody sort of caught it. So again, with some of the conversation that's happened, this was not done maliciously. This was not done anything other than a site change, which everybody thought was okay. At the time, it's my understanding that the building permit was closed for no less than 1 year, possibly longer, before this violation was noticed by a resident, which I believe is going to speak later. And they had some concerns with that due to their own personal application. However, we're dealing with the matter now because we can't deny the fact that it was constructed higher, and we're just trying to rectify that oversight by, as far as I'm concerned, all parties that were involved in the process. So if there's any additional questions, concerns, I'd be more than happy to help and understand and answer the questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeBoer. Mr. Marsh, go ahead.
Yes, through you to Mr. DeBoer. Is there habitable space in the upstairs of this building currently?
So the current use of the building is the homeowner's personal gym equipment with one bathroom facility that was compensated for and disclosed through the septic design. So there are no living quarters. It's more accessory to the primary dwelling for his own space, but it's not meant or intended for sleeping quarters.
So the original application addressed the gym and the washroom, is that correct?
That is my understanding, David.
Okay, thank you.
Any further? Yes, Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Perhaps through to Ms. Murchison, accessory buildings, are they allowed to have washrooms as in a case like this?
Ms. Murchison, go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, this is something, and Ms. Berry can also speak to this. This is a decision that has been dealt with numerous times with our planning staff, and they have approved on many interpretations that for depending on the type of proposed accessory use in that structure, that we are permitted to have washrooms in some of our accessory buildings.
Follow up, Mr. Strangway?
No, that's fine, thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Murchison. All right. Any further questions of the applicant? All right. Thank you, Mr. DeBoer. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? All right. Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Yes. Your name, please?
Hello, committee members. My name is Tracy Barbosa. I'm providing a statement on behalf of my parents, Sedalia Barbosa and Manny Barbosa at 15 Rockway Trail.
All right, please go ahead.
In regard to the variance application at 285 Omega Road, can this committee provide comment on how the permit inspection department overlooked the height of the structure that is built at 285 Omega Road? Could the committee please also provide comment on what the ethical standard that the city departments are to meet and uphold for approving, processing, and denying these applications? We ask for the denial of the application for a variance at 285 Omega Road simply because of the incorrect message it sends to all. Go through the proper channels and application process and you will be denied. However, if you build a structure first and then ask for a variance, this committee will consider it. Should the committee approve this variance, my parents will have absolutely no other choice but to exercise their full legal rights in relation to their application's denial. In closing, I would like to thank the committee for taking the time to hear our grievances today. I fully believe that this committee will act with integrity and fairness and correct an error that was made in this case and deny this application. Thank you very much.
All right, and thank you for taking the time. First, I'm going to go to Ms. Barry, and I think I'll go to the chief building official. But Ms. Barry, do you have any response to what's been said first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I heard a comment, and I'll apologize in advance if I got it wrong and ask for Ms. Barbosa's clarification. But in terms of exercising the legal rights on denial of their application, i.e. the former Barbosa minor variance application, I understand that the opportunity to exercise their rights on that refusal was through the 20-day period following the decision of the committee, also known as the appeal period. So that window had come and gone, and no appeal was filed, as far as I understand. When reviewing an application for minor variance, we do have the, not just luxury, but the requirement as planners to assess the circumstances as though the structure was not yet built. And I think that's an important distinction that I'd like to express to the committee, is that when looking at the geography, the nature of the topographic features, the impacts to all three areas, factors being impact on the environment, impact on municipal function, as well as impact on surrounding land uses and neighbors, is how we are able to conclude how minor of an impact there actually is. And of course, that's just one of three tests of four. Three other tests being the appropriateness of the development, and of course, compliance with the zoning and the official plan being the other three. So in approaching a circumstance just as this one, we do review the land and the circumstances as though that structure isn't there. Mr. Chair, if there's any other clarification I can provide, I shall do that.
And Ms. Murchison, you heard the comments the deputy had made. Do you have any response to that? Because I believe she alluded to the building permit process.
Yep. At this time, I have nothing further to add.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions of the deputy? All right. Ms. Archer, you had your hand up?
I have a question, not for the deputant though. Okay, through you, please, to,
Yep.
Well, I don't know, Ann Elmhurst sent this, so I don't know who I should ask the question of, but it says, the sewage system was installed to service the residential property, the residential dwelling on the property. It's not proposed, the modification to the garage is increase in height is not proposed for blah, blah, or plumbing fixtures. So, like, is the septic okay with this plumbing system in the garage?
Ms. Murchison, do you want to respond to that?
Through the chair, I would have to speak to Ann just to get clarification on that statement, and I can do that right now if it pleases you, or I can get back to you.
All right, you can get back to us while we're processing here. All right. All right, are there any questions of the lady deputant that was there? All right, none. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to this application? In opposition to this application? All right. Mr. DeBoer,
Sorry, I
you...
just have one more thing to add. When my parents put their application for their variance, the variance application to this committee and was denied, the use for our garage structure above was for storage. There's no plumbing, but we were denied. And the balcony was used to hang our parasails for parasailing, to dry out the sails. That was clearly discussed during our variance meeting with this committee.
All right, that's fine. We've heard from the planner, the manager of planning, that in fact, this isn't precedent setting here and we deal with each application on its own merits. So that's what we're attempting to do here now. Mr. DeBoer, do you have any response to what's been said?
I know Suzanne is going to be looking at getting the answer from Ms. Elmhurst. When I did speak, so just my involvement with this property was to do with the owner as well as the contractor that did the construction. It's my understanding through speaking with all those channels that this additional bathroom was contemplated and discussed with the health division at the time in order to accommodate that structure. And I believe, and I could be incorrect in saying so, but I believe that the other proponent that's speaking in opposition of this file, that their application was denied for other reasons beyond the height that this one is going for. Not, again, that it's setting a precedence, but I think there was other underlying site-specific issues that caused the denial of that application versus this application that we're hearing today.
All right,
So
well,
that's
we're dealing
what
with your
I
application,
understand.
so I think what we'll do, we're waiting for Ms. Murchison, so let's take 5 and we'll see if she... All right, we haven't got Ms. Murchison back, and I think if you read the comments from Ann. Oh, there she is. All right. Go ahead, Ms. Murchison.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. We've reviewed, I've spoken to Ms. Elmhurst and reviewed the nature of her comments. So at the time of circulation by the planning staff for this application, there's no indication on that application circulation that there was plumbing in this garage. So that's why her comments are worded the way they are. If that had been made aware, if we had been made aware of the plumbing in that circulation, the comments would have been slightly different. So there's two things that are in play here, and that is whether or not planning staff will be deeming the upper floor to be habitable space, or whether it still remains as accessory building space, because that will dictate the route to rectify that plumbing.
All right, but we've heard that there will be plumbing fixtures, so is that going to impact negatively the sewage system then, or is it adequate to handle that? I guess that's the question we have.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's what I was just saying. It really is based on, and maybe Ms. Berry can speak to this, is whether or not a gym space would be considered habitable space, because to do a septic review, so either way, the applicant's going to have to go through an application process with the septic team to recognize this plumbing. And if this is considered habitable space, then it is a full review that may impact on the size of the sewage system. If it is just considered accessory space, as other garages have been with washrooms in them, then the quick review of the system that's on site would be able to accommodate it, but we would have to go through the record update by going through a septic review.
All right, Ms. Archer, then I would ask, do we consider this significant enough then to perhaps, and I'm just asking at this point, to consider a deferral at some point until we get that information back? Because Ms. Murchison indicating that wasn't on the original application, so they were not aware of it, and that's why you got the comments you did. But now we are aware of it, so I guess you initiated the question, so where are you with that? We're not finished with the process yet, but I'm just curious as to where you are. Do you wish to have that information prior to being able to consider a motion?
Either that, or if we make it, if we approve it, make it
Conditional?
Yeah, conditional on the septic coming back with a everything's terrific type thing. I don't know. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I see Ms. Berry nodding her head, so that sounds like, thank you for that. That might be... Thank you, Ms. Murchison. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I'll ask again, is there anyone else online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? In opposition to the application? All right. I think I asked Mr. DeBoer if he had any comments, and he did. I think we did that. So, all right. A question, Mr.
For either Mr. DeBoer or Ms. Murchison. So the original plan, was it for this height, or I heard something in there that part of it was out anyhow, but generally the 6.5 meters was part of the application. Is that correct?
Let's go to Ms. Murchison first. Ms. Murchison, was that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you for that. All right. Committee, Ms. Archer, perhaps you would like to generate a motion with and articulate what you had indicated there?
Really don't know how to articulate it. I move that we approve this application with the first condition that's written in the recommendation, plus we receive confirmation from the is it called septic and building?
Yeah, just building department, I think, would be all encompassing.
Okay, building and planning, that they are in agreement with, or I don't know how to say it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Ms. Berry, do you want to comment?
Sure, Mr. Chair, along those lines, that should a septic approval be needed, that one be obtained.
Right. Comments or questions? Mr. Marr?
I'm going to struggle on this, but we are not here as a committee of council. And I think that's where my struggle is. As an independent committee, this does not conform. It's unfortunate whatever happened next door happened. First of all, it's not precedent setting. And as a committee goes, I think we have an obligation, considering, to not support this, and the applicant, so be it, will have to go and deal with it at a different level. It's not because I realize the city has made an error, but that's not what we're not supposed to be taking that into consideration. We're an independent body. We're supposed to look at the application for what it is, not that the fact there's been an error, not the fact that we've turned down someone else. So are we here on behalf of the city of Kawartha Lakes, or are we here as an independent body? And that's where I struggle, and I don't know how I can possibly support this.
Mr. Archer, do you wish to respond? Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
I certainly appreciate Mr. Marsh's comments. I'm sitting here, and of all the meetings we've had, this is one of the ones I've certainly struggled with the most. I don't see how right next door we refused an application, and then as stated, somebody has rightly or wrongly exceeded what the limitations are, and here, how can we put our upper hand and say, oh, that's fine to go ahead and build it because it's been built, we'll just approve it. So I'm certainly struggling, as Mr. Marsh is, that, is there some sort of, something that can be done to address this situation rather than leaving us with approving something that wasn't correctly done?
Yes, go ahead.
Did you say Councillor Yo? Sorry.
I did. Yes, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Two things. First, I was wondering if we're speaking to a motion, has it had a seconder yet?
Yes, we have. Ms. Richardson seconded.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, I keep freezing up. That's why I keep shutting my video off so I get better reception. But I understand what Councillor, what Mr. Marsh and Mr. Strangway are saying, but I'm going to speak in support of the motion because I believe this lot, and I believe the foliage and the coverage would have, in my opinion, satisfied the visual impacts and such on this particular building. I too was there when the neighbors was turned down. I thought I had a different recollection of it, that parts of it could be altered and stuff, but I can't say for sure. But I'm going to speak in support of this one simply because of the size of the lot and the coverage and the aesthetics of the building with the main building, which still doesn't go above the height, and take this application for what it is, and I think it's good planning. Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Richardson, did you wish to comment? You seconded? No. And I'll comment as well as chair, and I agree. I'll support the motion because I think we've heard Ms. Berry's explanations. We've heard the chief building official's explanations. And it seems to me, and agreeing with Councillor Yo, your comments with respect to the overall coverage and this sort of thing, it seemed the only discrepancy really, because we cannot use, and I understand that everyone's thinking about the previous application, that can't enter into the decision here, and it can't. It's been emphasized on so many occasions with this committee that this committee is not precedent setting, and that we have to judge every application on its own merits. We cannot be looking back 3 years ago or 2 years ago or last week and saying this happened or that happened. It has to do with the merits of this. And it would seem to me the only discrepancy we have, and thank you to Ms. Archer that it was brought up. The only discrepancy was, in fact, this septic system situation. The building department finding out later that, in fact, there was some consideration with respect to plumbing fixtures. So at this point in time, I think that the report says it all, and I'm prepared to support the amended motion on the floor. All right, did you wish to sum up? No, all right. And I will call the question. All those in favor? And that passes. Thank you. Those opposed? 2 opposed. Did you get that, Charlotte? Yes. All right. And thank you very much to everyone. I was going to say moving right along, but that does not seem to be the situation today. Anyway, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-011, and this is 37 Woods Avenue, Geographic Township of Emily. Welcome, Mr. Hardin. Good to see you, man.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I'm glad to be able to have the floor with you. So we have a couple of other interesting applications today, starting with this one. So this is 37 Woods Avenue. I'm just going to go through and share my screen here. There we are. So this application proposes a pool shed within a front yard, and also paired with that, there's a front yard reduction request. And the application is the result of a municipal law enforcement issue. There we go. So this property is a shoreline backlot within the Cowans Bay Shoreline Residential Neighborhood. There are residential lots to the north and to the south, as you can see on the aerial photograph, as well as to the east, and to the west is the municipal park known as Emily Tract. So this application meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So the majority of the lots on the west side of Woods Avenue contain dwellings that are set well away from the front lot line, as you can see on the aerial photograph here. And this is due to some topographical constraints for the lots that are further north. I did a variance, which some members of committee might recall a couple of years ago, a couple lots north of here. So the topography further north is actually a lot more severe, which is really pushing the dwellings to the back in order to have sufficient flat area for the septic beds in the front. So while that's not the case, topographically speaking, for this particular lot, that established line and built form has continued to the south. So this lot is much more level. And in this case, the house is still further back, the septic is in the rear, but the primary amenity space is also within the front. So as we can see with the distribution of the lots on the west side of Woods Avenue, because the houses are so far to the west of the property, really the primary amenity space is within that front yard area. And in order to make that more private, they've been very well vegetated, as you'll see in some site photograph pictures shortly. So the pool is an in-ground pool. It is in the front yard. The zoning bylaw does allow a pool to be in any yard, provided that it complies with the setback provisions of the zone, but that is not the case for the accessory buildings that might be paired with that pool use. So here we have pictures of the subject property from the road. So we can see that it is very well vegetated with a cedar hedge. So really you can't see past that hedge at all, except for where there's the break for the driveway entrance. The image on the right is me just walking pretty much to be in line with the hedge, so we can see the very spacious front yard. You can see the in-ground pool off to the side. There's some fencing that's been put up around it as well, with the house in the back there. The image on the left is me just pivoting along that cedar hedge area at the driveway entrance portion to see both the pool and the pool house there. So in this case, the pool house is located off to the side of the front yard. So it's really tucked well back from the driveway entrance. So it's not visible from the road at all, or even from where there's that break. in the hedgerow for the driveway entrance. And the pool house is oriented where it is in order to be paired with that accessory pool use. So it's there to house the pool equipment to run the pool, as well as offering some storage use for pool toys, and I believe also to function as a bit of a change room as well. So its placement close to the pool makes a lot of logistical sense in terms of having a staging and storage area that is other than the house for these items and these uses that are revolving around the pool, rather than having to go continuously back and forth between the house to retrieve pool toys and things like that. In terms of where it is placed with the front yard as well, being between the pool and the road, this makes use of what would otherwise be a very underutilized section of the front yard, because the space that's left between the hedge and the pool is not otherwise really going to be used for recreational amenity purposes due to its long and narrow strip nature and its location in relation to the primary amenity yard space, which is going to be that space between the pool and the house. So having the pool house on this side ensures that the rest of that space between the pool and the house is used for recreational and amenity space purposes. The image on the right is taken really showing all of the properties along this section of Woods Avenue. So the truck, the red truck, which is our site visit vehicle, is pretty much right outside the entrance of the subject property. So we're getting multiple driveways in this caption here. So we can just see that this trend of heavy vegetation to screen the front lot lines from view because of these basically rear yard uses being more private uses that are taking place in the front yards. That's why these hedgerows are here to protect for those more sensitive uses that you see in the front yards. And then we have another image of the pool house in the left image, this time looking out from the area in front of the house towards the road. And then the image on the right is me just panning slightly to look at the lots to the south. So getting a sneak peek of what's behind that very dense hedge along the road. So here we can see the same sort of thing. All the houses are set further back from the road, and you have these very generous front yards, which can be used for more private uses, considering the thick vegetative buffer that is in place along the front lot line. That's the end of the slide deck there. All right. So in conjunction, I think this is a well-suited spot for the pool house, and it's not really impacting the overall function of the front yard. Out of the ordinary with any other of the front yards that we see along the side of Woods Avenue, since they are functioning more as these private rear yard amenity spaces. And as a result, staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. And just for clarification, before I go to the committee on your background there, the application has come forth as part of a municipal law enforcement matter. Was this a public complaint, or how, could you maybe discuss that with us?
Sure, I can say that that the way municipal law enforcement works is that there is a complaint from the public that has to be lodged in order for their office to take action. So it's my understanding that that process occurred, which is why their office was retained, and have been working with the property owner in order to have this variance filed to address the non-compliance issue.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions of the planner? All right, being none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? All right, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Committee, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, as printed.
Do I have a seconder? Ms. Archer. All right, any further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right. And moving right along again, file number D20-2022-012. And this is 76 West Bay Boulevard, Geographic Township of Bexley. And again, we're honored with Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My pleasure. I will share my screen once more. Okay. All right, so this application is doing a couple of things here. So we are proposing an increase to the maximum accessory building lot coverage, which includes decks and stairs. And we're also looking to increase the number of accessory buildings and also to recognize the location of a cabin within the front yard that is also within the front yard setback. So it's really two built features that we're looking at here. Specifically, there's a boathouse. So as we can see in the aerial photograph, the brown shingled building is the current boathouse. They're looking to demolish that and make it a little bit bigger, which is what's triggering the accessory building lot coverage issue. And then through this review process, we picked up on the cabin as well. So we have, that's where the addressing the compliance issue with respect to the cabin is being incorporated into these requested reliefs. Okay. So the subject property is within a shoreline residential neighborhood on the western side of Balsam Lake. I'm just going to back up one image again here. So we have a whole bunch of shoreline lots between the lake and West Bay Road. The lot to the immediate north of the property is a municipally owned park block, I believe. There's a creek running through it, which is why it's not developed. And then there are rural lands on the west side of the road. So staff are of the opinion that the application meets the 4 tests for minor variance rather. So as we can see on the site plan here, the accessory buildings are located towards the north and south side lot lines. So this placement ensures that the bulk of the front and the rear yards are maintained visually, but also functionally for amenity space and recreational uses. The boathouse is remaining in the same location, as you can see. It's just being expanded more to the south and to the east. There are, so let's say the 2 accessory buildings, so there are 2 accessory buildings, being the frame shed here that's between the garage and the boathouse, and then the cabin here, which are modest in both footprint and in mass. The shed is also positioned such that it's pretty much screened from view, being between the garage and the boathouse. So the permission of an additional accessory building, which I'm just going to pick on the cabin since that's the new one, is permissible as the accessory building mass on the property is distributed amongst 4 smaller buildings, with those 2 of the 4 being quite small in nature. So the cabin is proposed within the front yard. But however, the front yard is screened from view for the most part. I will get into the site photographs in a moment. So this is the boathouse here. So here we have pictures of both the boathouse and the shed behind it, and then we can see the garage to the very far back on that image on the right. And then, sorry, on the image on the left. On the image on the right, I'm standing on the lake looking back towards the property. So we have the house kind of in the middle, and then the boathouse off to the right. And then we have views of the front yard here. So the image on the left is me standing on the driveway looking towards the house. So we can see the garage in the foreground there, the house off to the right. And then on the image on the right, I'm standing pretty much on the south side yard of the house looking back towards the road. So we have the cabin pretty much front and center off to the side there, and the road as well. So we can see that there are cedar trees along the front lot line, not of just this property, but the lots on the other side as well. So we do have a fair bit of screening there. That being said, any portion of the cabin that you will be able to see from the road which is in the next image here. So we can see a little bit of an outline here. It's very much obscured still. And because of the size of the cabin, it's not really presenting a very sizable built mass to the streetscape. So I'm not expecting any adverse massing impacts as a result of permitting the cabin to be in the location that it is. And then we can see another image on the right that shows the cabin again and its distance between the front lot line where that chain link fence is and the west wall of the cabin. And then we can also see all of the vegetation there as well. So since the writing of this report, comments have been received from 2 individuals. So we have Lauren Langfeld and Davina and Jamie Anderson, both neighbors in the community. So staff have reviewed the comments. The comments are also included in committee's amended agenda package. And in response to the comments, staff offer the following. And there's 4 main points here that I'll sum up what the concerns are. So the first one was environmental concerns. So the boathouse is going to require a permit from the Kawartha Region Conservation Authority because it is within their regulated area. So those environmental concerns will be addressed through that permitting process. The application for variance was also circulated to their office. While we did not receive comment back for this particular proposal, we do still have that additional permitting process that will have to take place in conjunction with the building permit process later on. And also just to add a clarification there, the boathouses are permitted within the zoning bylaw. There was the second point had to do with concerns about past and future compliance for the parcel. So we can only deal with the variances that are before us now. So that is scoped down to the boathouse and to the cabin. So if there are concerns over other built features on the property, then contacting the Building Septic Division or the Municipal Law Enforcement Office, whichever one is applicable, to lodge a complaint is the appropriate process to deal with those concerns to see if there actually is a non-compliance issue. That being said, I know there was a bit of a concern over whether that existing shed between the garage and the boathouse is actually being used as a shed. You are permitted to have 1 cabin per property. So I would suggest to committee that we could add another condition to address that specific concern. So condition number 2 right now would become condition number 3, and then we could insert a new condition number 2, which would read something very similar to the following. That prior to the issuance of the building permit for the cabin, the owner shall submit photographic evidence to the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, demonstrating that the building identified as shed in Appendix C to report COA 2022-019 is used as a shed. I believe that would address the concern over how that building is being used while still tying it to a permitting process. The third concern had to do with the capacity of the sewage system. So the chief building official is on the line, has had a conversation with Ms. Elmhurst as well. But I've also been part of that conversation, so I can relate to you that because the property is serviced by a holding tank, there's no specific environmental concerns with respect to the capacity of that system to handle additional human habitation or space, because it's all going into a tank that is then being treated off-site anyway. And then with respect to the fourth concern, there was concern over whether or not permitting a cabin in the front yard with this reduced setback in the front yard would set a precedent. So as Mr. Chair, you identified correctly before, there is no precedent that's being set when committee considers an application for any property. It's all site specific based on the constraints and the proposal of the built form at that time and how that integrates with the neighborhood and all of the applicable policy and bylaws. So in this particular case, I don't see, based on what I've reviewed in my report, that this particular permission, if committee chooses to grant the requested relief for the cabin, would be precedent setting for this street. So staff respectfully recommends that the application be granted subject to the amendment as identified by staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding, and I would wish to comment on your addressing individually the public's concerns with respect to this. Well done. We do appreciate that as a committee. And I just wanted to, and committee, this is a believe it or not, but I'm alluding to all the conversations we've had today around water servicing and all this sort of thing. When I was going through this, I highlighted these three areas, and does it ever apply to a day? If you look at the proposal on this application, it says on page 2, the cabin is not proposed to contain washroom or kitchen facilities. Okay, we got that? Then we move to page 3 of 5 down number 2, and it says the cabin will also provide additional bedroom and amenity space. So the light goes off for me, and I think, okay, well, that's interesting. And then I go to Ms. Elmhurst's comments at the back, if I can find them. The holding tank will accommodate the existing residential dwelling and the cabin uses, although we've been told there aren't going to be any cabin uses that would relate to the septic system. You know what? I'm just going to stop asking questions. All right. Questions of Mr. Harding? Yes.
Through you, if I heard you correctly, you did say that the applicant will require a building permit from Kawartha Conservation, and yet you didn't mention Kawartha Conservation in your report, and I had wondered if there were no shoreline concerns.
Mr. Harding.
Through Mr. Chair to Member Richardson. So it is correct that we circulated the Kawartha Region Conservation Authority for comment on this application. We did not receive a response. That being said, because the property is within the regulated area of the Kawartha Region Conservation Authority, their office will be required to issue a permit for the boathouse expansion work. Or it's basically a new boathouse, but they will be required to issue a permit for that new boathouse build as part of the building permit process.
So should that be a condition then, since it isn't mentioned in your report anywhere? Or is the CBO going to pick it up regardless?
Through Mr. Chair, definitely we can ask the CBO, but in this particular case, the regulated buffer that we rely on to determine whether or not the Conservation Authority is to be circulated is quite clear on our mapping. So I don't believe there's any need to further reiterate that a condition that's already going to be required through the building permit process also be required as a condition of variance.
Ms. Murchison, I totally agree with the question from Mrs. Richardson, because we've had in the past been advised that these red flags assist you during the building permit process. So would you like to comment on that?
Through the chair, Mr. Harding is correct in that if the building falls or the proposed building falls within a regulated area on the conservation mapping, then it is required through the Building Code Act that the applicant for a building permit obtain a permit or approval from the Conservation Authority that has jurisdiction. So it is applicable law to a building permit, and the building permit cannot be issued without something in writing from that agency.
With respect to that, how do you or whoever know that it is going to be requiring a permit from Kawartha Conservation if you're not technically looking at all the mapping or whatever it is you look at?
Ms. Murchison.
Through the chair, every building permit that's issued, the staff that do the plan review, they pull up the conservation mapping in our GIS system and confirm whether or not the property is within a regulated area. As well, each applicant is required to complete an applicable law checklist where they are obligated to tell us whether they're in a regulated area. So there's a couple of points where it's double checked and caught, and so it shouldn't need to be triple checked by putting it into your conditions.
That's fine. Like you, I recall at one time it was requested that we include that as a condition, but I guess process have changed.
No, you're absolutely right. Did come up in the past, so, yeah. Mr. Marsh, did I see your hand?
Further to that, but I don't even know why, because there's a shortage of staffing everywhere, like in planning everywhere, including the Conservation Authority. Why do we go through this exercise of even circulating it to them? Why don't we just automatically, and we save our planners having to circulate and get comments back if it's in a regulated area, why don't we just add to each of the reports from the planning department to the regulated area, and we'll need approval? Simple as that, because this is insane. The Conservation Authority can't get back to people because they're buried. Everyone is, and we're just duplicating, and it obviously, it really doesn't matter. It's in a regulated area, the Conservation Authority, so perhaps that can go back to the planning department.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Through the manager, but it's, you know how long I've been frustrated about these things with conservation. When it suits them, they respond. When they don't, too bad, because they get to veto it anyhow. So let's just eliminate it and put it in, make our planners a lot easier for them. It's an automatic. If it's in a regulated area, it will require a permit. So if that could go back, I'd certainly appreciate it. But
There have been issues, there's no question. So, Ms.
Thank
Berry,
you,
would you like to
to
respond
staff
to
as
Mr.
well.
Marsh's comments?
Sure, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, we certainly are facing similar struggles, as is the Conservation Authority with respect to staffing and resourcing, and finding ways to plow on and plot on and work through those. In fact, earlier today, the director had reached out just to oversee and have a discussion on outstanding applications and what comments are needed in light of the very recent staffing changes that they've had. So I share that with the committee because it's breaking news. Certainly an attempt to continue to stay on top of things, and we appreciate that. In addition to the authority's regulatory arm and hat, what other pieces of our appendages can we note here, or accessories? They also serve another function, many other functions, one of which for us is to review natural heritage features. So there is also a policy perspective that they provide to us that we value.
then it wasn't required here? The heritage aspect, or will that be addressed?
Question to Ms. Berry?
Through you, sorry, Mr. Marsh, are you specifically, I know you're referencing what my comments just were, but when you reference heritage, are you referring to something specific? I'm speaking in generalities with respect to provincial policy as well as our official plan.
My question would be, are they required to do that on every application? Are they required to look at it? If there's heritage features, are they required to respond, or is it just certain properties?
They would be required to respond on no matter where the property is, whether it's regulated or not. So they're, in other words, their comments aren't simply restricted to just regulated properties, if that helps.
No, I believe they respond to every application, whether it's negligible, their comments, or whether they are actually focusing on some area. So anyway, let's move on. I think we've killed that one. All right. Mr. Harding, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add a bit of clarification as to when the Conservation Authority is circulated. So yes, if the property is within the regulated area, absolutely, we would circulate their office as required, as it is required. But also, as Ms. Berry has identified as well, they also act as basically our environmental review agency for areas relating to natural heritage issues. So that includes the same properties that they regulate, but it also includes other significant heritage features that are identified within our official plan. So if there is a property that falls within a natural heritage feature or within a buffer of that heritage feature that is not regulated by the Conservation Authority, then we would also circulate that application to their office. But if the property happened to fall outside of their regulated area and is not anywhere close to a natural heritage feature, then we would not be circulating their office on that variance application.
Yeah, and my understanding is that even if it goes beyond a regulated area, because the whole of the city of Kawartha Lakes is not covered by Kawartha Conservation, they, on a per diem basis, if asked, will look at situations beyond their actual regulated area too. Is that not correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. In those cases, they are looking at it from the natural heritage feature lens that I was talking about. So those are features that have been identified as of significance in our official plan, but you are correct, those features fall outside of their jurisdictional area.
Thank you. All right, I think we were still, are there any further questions of the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Good afternoon. Trying to see if my video is working here. Can you see me?
Can't see you. I can hear you, but I cannot see you, sir.
Okay, I apologize. I've been having problems with the video here for some reason, and it's not coming through. If you're okay to...
It's fine just to
hear me?
talk if you want to. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. My name is Joe Hood. I'm working on behalf of the owners of this property. Just to clarify, as far as conservation, we do already have a permit number in place for shoreline work and boathouse. I can give you the permit number if you like, so that you can verify that yourselves.
I don't know that we require that. Go ahead if you have further to speak to.
No, just basically letting you know, because I know the way everything works. So in order for us to actually get approvals, we have to get through planning first. So the conservation, everybody passes what we need to through the building department. So basically yourselves and building department are our last sort of business to allow what needs to happen here. So Trent Severn conservation has already been approved on the shoreline. I just wanted to jump in and let you know that, so that hopefully that clarifies that issue.
And thank you very much for that. Is there anything further you wish to say in regards to the application?
Nope, David is, Mr. Harding has said everything just perfectly there, so it's all good. Thank you.
All right, and thank you for that. Are there any questions of the applicant? All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Committee. Ms. Richardson.
As amended by the planner.
All right. Seconder, Mr. Councillor Yeo. All right. Any further comments or questions with respect to the amended motion on the floor? Being none, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. All right. All right, we're now dealing with file number D20-2022-013, and it's 29 Odessa Road, Geographic Township of Verlem. And you have in your package a memorandum from the Manager of Planning, Ms. Berry. Ms. Berry, would you like to speak to that memorandum, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have prepared this deferral memo for the committee's consideration for today. The application, the file number was just quoted. We did circulate notice of today's hearing in accordance with the statutory requirements of the Act on March 3rd. The application is to request relief from various zone provisions in order to acknowledge the location of an above-ground swimming pool, number one. Number two, to permit the construction of a deck attached to the swimming pool. And number three, to permit an addition to the single detached dwelling. Now, in the intervening days, new information is being considered currently by staff. So in order for us to conclude our analysis and evaluation of this new information, we have discussed an alternative approach to this process. Instead of proceeding today with reporting on the matter, we have discussed both with the owners as well as the applicants what our preferred approach would be. They are agreeable to this approach, and now I put forward to you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee what that is. We recommend the deferral by 1 month to complete our review and to subsequently present to the committee at its next scheduled meeting, April 21st. Based on what I have provided, no further notice of that meeting would be required. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Are there any questions of Ms. Berry? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Is there anyone online wishing to speak? Keep getting pictures flashing.
Well, I'm actually the applicant on this
Yeah,
file.
do you wish to speak to it, Ms.
so-
Murchison?
Yeah, no, Ms. Berry has summed it up well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application, opposition to the application? Right. All right. The only thing is time to discuss, and that's been established. So all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. We're now dealing with file number D20-2022-016, and this is 33 Victoria Avenue South, former town of Lindsay. And again, Manager of Planning, Ms. Berry. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mark and Dawn Wilson have applied on behalf of the owner, a numbered company 118-5512 Ontario Limited, for relief, which, if granted, would facilitate the construction of a new condominium building. It would be a 6-story building, and the parcel, just under 2.5 acres, 2.37 acres, and the 6-story condo would provide for 104 units on a footprint of 2,371 square meters. All right, we are talking about a parcel of land at 33 Victoria Avenue South in Lindsay, and the relief that is being sought is threefold. Number one, to reduce the number of parking spaces from the required 162 down to 123. Secondly, to reduce the minimum width of the landscaping buffer from 1.8 meters down to 1 meter. And thirdly, to increase the maximum building height from its permitted 18 meters up to 22 meters. And this would not increase any livable space, but instead allow for rooftop mechanical infrastructure as well as some design features. Pending any new information that is presented as a result of today's hearing, the staff recommendation prepared by Mr. Staton is that the application be granted as a result of the assessment and evaluation of the 4 tests of minor variance. There are 2 conditions that have been suggested for your consideration. Thank you. And they, of course, include the building construction materials that are appended as C&D to the report, and, of course, that a site plan agreement be entered into and that take place within 2 years of this decision. So I will, at this point, just summarize the report for your benefit and the benefit of our viewing public. The official plan for the town of Lindsay designates this parcel as residential. The zoning does permit a high-rise in an exception zone with the holding being in place until a site plan agreement is executed. The proposed servicing full municipal water, wastewater, and storm. Real mix of land uses adjacent to this property, including both high and low residential uses, mixed residential and commercial uses as well. And I will now turn to just a brief description of how this proposal and the relief that is being sought does constitute good planning. So with respect to the sort of desirability and appropriateness of the proposal at this site, it is adjacent to the existing Union Station condo development. So we're just south of downtown Lindsay, high traffic area, where we are in proximity to other high density development. We see that through the 5-story condo building to the north, as well as an apartment building to the south on Melbourne Street. The building in a position to provide additional residential options to both existing residents of Lindsay as well as new residents that the city may see. The additional height, of course, required as noted at the outset for design elements. The design elements that the developer has noted are stone veneers, and of course the mechanical features that are needed on the top are the reasons behind the increased height request. So with similar buildings in the area, we see like height and like form, which is important when evaluating how the massing and sort of the overall bulk of the proposal will achieve a harmonious mix with surrounding uses, and we do think that the height increase at certainly from the street level would be imperceptible. So turning our minds to the reduction in parking spaces, the report goes on to describe that actually, like the Union Station condo, there was a request for relief from parking. And not so much to bring to your attention that relief was granted, but more so to advise that since the relief was granted a number of years ago, we have not seen an influx or a number of infractions or any that we've been made aware of for on-street parking issues, either through enforcement, the enforcement arm, or through other nuisance complaints. The developer is also, in an attempt to offset the reduction in parking, has proposed something that perhaps is a little unique and perhaps new to some either residents or even members of the committee, but it's to implement a rideshare vehicle program at this location, and that would be available to residents who wish to utilize a vehicle on demand, as they say, quote unquote. I'll just note with respect to the landscape reduction, a privacy fence is being proposed along the entire western lot line. The fence, combined with the height of the armor stone that's proposed along the southern section of the property, actually results in a higher quality screening for specifically the western units. And that helps to mitigate what might be perceived as a nuisance from things like headlights at the ground level. So this is, again, an opportunity to look at a reduction in quantity to be compensated for some increased quality, and that would be implemented through the subsequent site plan agreement process. So I'll turn to zoning to address a couple of other matters. The category already being residential, high-rise 1 special, it's an exception zone, but it does already permit the apartment building, the residential condominium use. We are seeing a trend with purchasers of condominium units downsizing from their existing homes, and along with that, reducing the number of vehicles. By no means is this based on an extensive scientific and exhaustive canvas of market research, but this is certainly something that the developer has flagged and that we are seeing as well. The proximity of the site to downtown and the ride-sharing initiatives that I've mentioned do certainly help justify and provide a rationale for the reduction in the number of parking units. I will not belabor points that I have already covered, and instead I will turn to compliance with the official plan category of residential. The residential designation in the Town of Lindsay official plan does contemplate a variety and range of housing densities and options, high-density residential being one of them. Circulated the application in accordance with the Act. We did not receive any objections or concerns from our commenting partners. And in fact, at the time of writing the report, we hadn't received any comments from the public. And to this day, I'm aware that we haven't received any written submissions, which, as we've seen earlier in the meeting, is sometimes the case after an application is reviewed and a report written and a recommendation made, that we receive comments thereafter, and I don't believe that that's the case. I certainly stand to be corrected to see if anyone's on the line to speak to the matter. So, Mr. Chair, I will close my comments on that note.
All right, and thank you for that. Are there any questions of the manager? Yes, Mr. Richardson, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought I had already put it on through you. On page 5, it indicates there's an outstanding building permit. So has construction already started on that property?
Perhaps we can get the chief building official to respond to that. Ms. Murchison, are you there? Did you hear the question, Ms. Murchison?
You're asking about outstanding permit. Could you just refresh my address number so I can go pull up the permit? It may be for a site trailer. That's what I think it might be. Is it 33 Victoria? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yes, it's for the sales trailer that was put in place to facilitate the sale of the, I believe it is the second tower they constructed.
Any further questions of the manager? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
I'm online, but just willing to answer any questions that I could possibly help with.
Sir, sir, is that correct? Is it Wilson? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
it's Don Wilson.
All right.
Sorry.
All right, so you're just looking for questions then? All right, are there any questions?
Yeah, or I'm just here to support the application, and I appreciate the comments that have been made so far.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any questions of Mr. Wilson? All right, thank you. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? This way, is there anyone online that wishes to speak to this application?
It's just Don Wilson again, just supporting the application as is.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Right, so there's no one wishing to speak in opposition to the application? All right. Committee, Ms. Richardson.
As recommended by staff.
All right, and seconded by Mr. Strangway. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All right, moving right along, we're dealing with, and by the way, I realize, Ms. Berry, that you took these applications from Mr. Stainton on very short notice. A job very well done. Thank you. All righty. We're dealing with Mr. Harding again, and this is file number D20-2022-017. This is 11 Cedar Tree Road, Geographic Township of Earlham. Go ahead, Mr.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so the owners are Stuart and Kristen McDonald, and the applicant is Tom DeBoer of TD Consulting. So this application proposes to permit an increase in accessory building coverage, or sorry, total lot coverage, but this is really to bump up the coverage of an accessory building that is proposed. So we're looking to go from 10% total lot coverage to 10.6. So the subject property is a vacant lot located just to the east of the intersection of CKL Road 121 and Cedar Tree Road, as can be seen here. It is surrounded by rural uses on all sides, but we can see there's a lot more heavy forest type coverage on the eastern side of the property. The garage is proposed to the northwest corner of the lot. We can see there is a single detached dwelling that is also proposed to be in the approximate center of the property. And here we have some preliminary elevations of what the detached garage is to look like. And then we have the house. For comparison, it's going to be the flipped version of this because the garage, the 3-bay garage, is proposed on the left side of the house rather than the right, as shown. And then we have the subject property. So very, very abstract with that, since we have no development whatsoever at this point in time. So the application does meet the 4 tests for minor variance. As I identified previously, the detached garage is proposed to the side and behind the wall of the front wall of the dwelling, rather. And that placement is going to ensure that the dwelling remains the visually prominent building on the lot. So the images I have here right now, so we've got the driveway entrance towards the center of the property right here. So the house is going to be sitting somewhere in this location here, and the garage would be off to the side here. The image on the right is me just panning, looking east down the road, so we can see the subject property here. Driveway entrance into the lot is here. And then the image on the right again is that same driveway entrance leading into the lot. So that house is going to be pretty much front and center there. And then the image on the left is me just looking along Cedar Tree Road towards CKL Road 121, which is running through on a diagonal here. So for visualization purposes, I'm going to go back to the sketch since there's not too much to look at for the aerial photographs. I'd like to give you a sense of just how rural this area is, and that there's lots of open space around this property. There we are. So as a result of all the rural uses in the area, this minor increase to lot coverage is not expected to have any adverse impact to any of the surrounding uses, being primarily agricultural and rural related. The garage is going to allow for larger vehicle storage and for the placement of a home occupation outside the home. It is acceptable to locate these activities within an accessory building rather than have them within the dwelling itself. As the lot is within the general rural zone, or also known as the A1 zone, it is subject to the same lot coverage requirements as a much larger lot within the same zone category. However, this is not an agricultural lot with tens or hundreds of hectares of land to play with. We have about an acre, just over an acre. So with that in mind, this is a much smaller lot, which is proposed for residential uses. So we're going to look at what some other zone categories within the Berlin zoning bylaw allow for a smaller lot that is zoned for residential use. So we look to the limited service residential and the residential 1 zone categories for inspiration here. And in those cases, for those 2 zone categories, the maximum building lot coverage is 33% as of right. So in this case, we're dealing with 10% looking to go up to 10.6. So this is quite appropriate in the context of the much higher lot coverages that are permitted for lots that would be used for residential purposes that are zoned for that purpose as of right, rather than just the A1 zone. The property is designated rural within the City of Kawartha Lake's official plan, and a wide assortment of uses, including low-density residential uses, are permitted within this designation. And in this case, we have a residential accessory building that is proposed. So it's in keeping with that designation's intent. Staff respectfully recommends that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, sir. Are there any questions of the planner? Ms. Archer, go ahead.
Through you, please, to Mr. Harding. I'm a little confused. So we say it's a vacant lot to start with, but on the picture, it looks like there's a building smack dab in the middle of it on Appendix B. The aerial shot.
I'm going to use the slide deck here to just share that. Okay, this, for committee's reference, all of our aerial imagery is satellite imagery that was taken in 2018. So in this particular case, we have the site as it appeared at that time. So it looks like there might have been perhaps a shipping container or perhaps a trailer on site at that time, but the site visit that was done last month, the show committee again, so these 2 shots show the entirety of the cedar, or the entirety of the property as viewed from Cedar Tree Road. There's very clearly no buildings or structures on the lot now.
Thank you. So what we're doing then is they're going to build a dwelling, but it doesn't need any of our approvals. And what they need approval on is the garage/residential aspect?
They need, through the chair, yes, the house is permitted as a right because it complies with lot coverage. The garage is slightly too big. So they could still have a garage, but it would be a lesser footprint than what they're proposing in this application.
but also in the garage, there's going to be a residential aspect of it?
Through the chair, no, there will not be. The garage is proposed for storage. There's also proposed to be a home occupation that is carried out in a portion of the garage.
So home occupation is different than residential?
Through the chair, that is correct. A home occupation can be a variety of different uses, such as office or a workshop where there are goods manufactured on site, which I believe is the case for this particular individual. The applicant told me that the individual is employed in the HVAC trade, so he will be doing some construction of ventilation in a portion of this building.
Thank you. And also then, to follow that up, the home occupation doesn't exceed 25% of the dwelling unit area. Someone, that's not our concern, I'm assuming, but somebody else oversees that it doesn't exceed 25%?
Through the chair, yes. So the owner and the applicant are going to need to make sure when they file that building permit that the shop space in the garage is going to need to not exceed that 25% of the GFA of the dwelling.
Thank you.
Further questions of the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Yes, Mr. DeBoer.
Good
go ahead.
afternoon again. Good afternoon again, committee. It's Tom DeBoer once again from TD Consulting. Thank you very much, David, for that. Just for additional clarification, the site is vacant. What David alluded to on the property was actually a travel trailer that was utilized by the previous owner for recreational purchases, whether it was illegal or not, I don't know, but the property changed hands at the beginning of this year, or late last year rather, sorry. And all of those parts and pieces were removed as part of the sale of the property. Secondly, the dwelling, which obviously needs to happen prior to the construction of this garage that we're seeking relief for. We have submitted a building permit application to the building division. It has been deemed complete. We received an invoice for the fees of that permit yesterday, in which case the owner is in the effort of making that payment, in which case the building permit for the dwelling itself will be achieved either tomorrow or first of next week, which would bring that whole process into compliance. And then after that, as David mentioned, we're looking for a little bit over the size in terms of allowing the individual for his own personal uses, primarily for storage of his vehicles, but then also secondary to that would be the, from time to time, construction of parts, pieces, and potentially storage of materials that will be used off-site on other job sites for his business, as David alluded to, he is an HVAC contractor. So from time to time, they'll park the vehicles at his residence and then have some parts and pieces readily accessible should they be needed for off-site construction. So there won't be any construction per se or anything of that nature on the property. From a noise consideration, it'll just be more for storage and implementation, sort of in transit, so to speak, for his business. So to meet that 25% is not a challenge at all. Other than that, if there is any additional questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. DeBoer, for that. Are there any questions? Ms. Archer?
Through you, please, to Mr. DeBoer. Did you say the applicants purchased the property this year?
I believe it was late last year.
Okay, because I just see there's an outstanding building permit from 2021, so that's for the house, I'm assuming, is it?
You are correct. That's the one that we just, there was some minor discrepancies with the plans. They were solidified earlier this week, and I believe the invoice was either sent to my office yesterday or this morning, one of the two. So we're now at the final stage of completing that permit process.
Thank you.
Any further questions of Mr. DeBoer? All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Being none, committee, where are we? Mr. Strangway.
As printed.
Do I have a seconder? Mr. Marsh. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right, now we're dealing with certainly last but certainly not least. We've got Mr. Harding again, and this is file number D20-2022-018. And this is 1420 Highway 7A, Geographic Township of Manvers. Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application has been filed by Jamie Leith. The application proposes to construct a two-story addition to a single detached dwelling. The property is located in the western side of the hamlet of Bethany, on the south side of Highway 7A. And the application meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So we can see here there's an existing single car attached garage that is proposed to be demolished and replaced with the addition that you see here. And it's going to have 4 garage doors, so 4 vehicle storage with habitable space to the rear as well as on the 2nd story, as we can see here. So the existing house is in single story. Now we have the site. So the residential lots along the south side of Highway 7A all contain dwellings that are about in line with one another. You could see that in Appendix B. I can certainly go back to that appendix as well, being the aerial photograph. But we have the site context here as well, just showing how similarly in line all of the existing residential built form is along this side of the highway. And that includes the subject property. The house on the subject property is very much in line with the built form of all the houses to the east and to the west of it, as can be seen here. I've taken shots both ways. So the image on the right is me looking to the west. The image on the left is me looking to the east. So we can see pretty much all the way down all the front yards, and the church is the only thing that's out of line with all the other built form on that side of the road. And then the image on the right being looking to the west, there is nothing that's out of step with all of the other built form along this side. And that continues on till the edge of where the hamlet terminates. So due to this, there are no adverse impacts to sight lines or to neighborhood character that are anticipated as a result of allowing this addition to be built in line with the existing residence, which is also in line with the existing built form on each side of the road. The property is designated hamlet settlement area within our official plan, and low density residential uses are anticipated within this designation. And in this case, we do have an addition to a single detached dwelling that is proposed. Since the writing of this report, comments were received from a neighbor, Mike Smith. I believe that has made it into your amended agenda packages as well. His comment pertains to kind of well water issues. And I do just want to clarify that well water is not a concern of the municipality, and definitely not of the committee in terms of the context of this variance application. And it's my understanding that if there are well issues that are encountered, then that's something that would be deemed a civil matter rather than a municipal one. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions noted in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you. Are there any questions of the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? Hello, sir. We see you there. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, David. I don't have a lot to add to that. My house was built in 1960 and 1987. They came out with this bylaw, and so that's why I'm asking for this this minor variance.
And I'm assuming, I can't read, I'm assuming you're Mr. Leith?
I am, sir. Sorry about that.
All right. Yeah, no problem. All right. Are there any questions of the applicant? All right. Being none. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to this application? Is he there? Have you got him, Joe? Oh, there he is. All right. Hello, sir. We see you there. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay.
Hello?
Yeah. Are you Mr. Smith?
Yes, that's me, Mike
All right.
Smith.
All right. Go ahead, sir. You want to speak to the application?
I'm just inquiring about the well issue, but that was just stated there a minute ago. This my only concern was, is this a part of the Kawartha Lakes Conservation Area? I know my house is on the buffer zone. Has this been looked into as well?
Mr. Harding, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I can. So this property, the built form does not fall within the regulated area of the Conservation Authority.
It's not part of the Conservation Authority as regulated area, sir.
Okay, no problem. And if there, my only question was again due to my dug well. I know our neighbors have had issues with waters in the past. I personally have not. I was just concerned about like the depth of the structure, if that would impact my well or not. But as Mr. Harding stated, this would be a civil matter if I did have issues.
Yes, I think that's what Mr. Harding suggested, was that this was a civil matter, but I won't speak for him. Go ahead, Mr. Harding. Do you wish to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is my understanding, is that it would be. I'll defer to the manager of planning if she has any additional information that she could provide.
Ms. Barrett?
Nothing further.
Yeah, that would be strictly a civil matter between you and your neighbor, sir, if a problem were to occur related to your water situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
And thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it. Are there any questions of the deputant or applicant? Or not the applicant, but the gentleman speaking? No? All right. Thank you for taking the time, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? All right, being none. Committee, where are we? Mr. Myers? As printed, and I think I saw Ms. Archer there as a seconder. Any further comments or questions with respect to the motion on the floor? All those in favor? Your application is approved, sir. Well, I think we've just about exhausted that and us, so. All right, no defer, blah, blah, blah. Under other business, well, first thing I'll do is ask staff, is there anything to add under other business? Everything supposedly is opening up COVID-wise at the end of April. Do you have anything to enlighten us with?
We are still operating week by week here and rely on the updates from the CAO's office with respect to the latest and greatest from the pandemic recovery team. So as soon as we know, we will communicate any changes to our format for our meetings and structure via email as soon as we know.
Now, the question with respect to masks, I think, are masks still going to be required here, sort of thing, when folks come in? I know it's a voluntary thing if you wish to wear a mask, which I will be doing, but do you know anything?
Nothing further on that point yet.
Anything further? Yeah.
Still haven't been able to get anywhere with my Truth and Reconciliation. I've left it in the hands of Miss Briggs, I think her name is, and she said she'd get back to me, and she hasn't, so I'm just waiting.
Well, we're going to have to expel you. That's the only.
No, I was going to say you're not in contravention. Where?
Out of here.
Thank you for flagging that. We'll follow up. It's a different story. That might be contravention.
So, Leah, will this be reflected in their evaluations or what? Oh, you had to bring that up. And Steve, I got to say, did you voluntarily move over there? You used to be there, and half the time I wouldn't see you, so this is perfect, being over there. I can... Anything further from members of committee or staff about anything going on? All right, being none, then I guess we're looking at, the next meeting is Thursday, April the 21st at 1 p.m. here. And a motion to adjourn. Mr. Marsh, Mr. Richardson, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you.